help you know, understanding name. So if you can give host 90 or Arvind or Deepu or whatever, then it is easy to remember rather than 10.10.10.90. So you are basically doing a mapping between the IP address and the name. That's what you're doing. So you don't need to do that. And I was trying to show you can do that. So you build the server, it is successfully done. You can connect to that server using its own IP. That was the same thing we did with the ESXi server. We didn't do the name, So that's it. So I don't think that has anything to do with the ESX build. So it's not needed. It is not required, and you don't have rights also to do that because
no, that is fine. That is fine. After that, I have done multiple installations on 4.1, 5.1 as well. So it works. It worked very well.
Good. Okay, so I think most of you guys, I haven't seen any mail from Byron. I think Byron, I saw you were connected. I know Gene connected. I didn't see Fanny doing anything. Raiden, I didn't see any mails from you. Shri also, not sure. So I hope you all know how to build. You can continue to do that, but again, remember me. I'm just reminding you again. This practice of building, wiping off, reinstalling, you can do probably for next 3-4 days. Once that is done, we have to stop doing that. We need those servers to be staying like that because we're going to make more networks. We're going to add storage to it. At that point, it is not that easy to build a server, then create all that switches back, create all that networking and storage connections back. It's not possible. So to get a feel and to get an experience on how to build an ESX server or ESXi, this is the time to do it. At a later point, if you want to do that, probably you may not be able to. Shri, yes, you can build, and there are 4 servers. I haven't seen any time there are more than 2 servers are getting used. I typically see that 19 and 16 were using, 17 and 18 were free. So please use all servers and do it. I've never seen 4 people working together. So please use that and get familiar with your build process. Okay. So I don't know. Is there any server there we can use now? So I'm going to proceed. So we're going to do the class. There is a thing I wanted to inform. We have a community election in my house. We have 75 houses in our community, and there is an election actually going on today to elect some representative, and one of my friends is a candidate. So I have to go for that. That is around 3 o'clock, but probably by 3:15 I will go for that, but I will be back in half an hour. Meantime, you guys can do some labs. I will teach you something to practice there. But I will be back, and then we will continue. We have to do probably 5:30 up to 5:30, or if everybody interested, maybe we can do a little bit more. The reason being, as I said, today is and tomorrow 30th. These 2 Sundays, I'm definitely taking class. Next week, I already send you the class details. There is class on 25th Tuesday, 26th Wednesday, 28th Friday, and 30th Sunday. And coming to October is actually a little problem. We're going to have class on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. There is class. I'm going to take 3 days continuous classes because Thursday, most probably, I may not be able to do because I'm flying to South Carolina 4th, 5th, and 6th, and I'll be back only on 8th morning. And then 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, we can have class again. Again, 11th is a question because this week, again, I'm out for another conference. So hopefully by 20th I can finish, but again, it all depends on how much time we get and all. Okay, so please plan your thing. I'm just giving a rough estimate. There is no classes on 7th these weekends. These October weekends, there is definitely no class. It's going to be weekdays.
I had a question, if you have time to answer really quick.
Sure.
When I was installing the ESXi or ESX server, I went ahead and installed Windows 2008 R2. The problem I ran into is when I added the ISO to it, it would say that there was no boot CD detected, and eventually I figured out that I had to Control-Alt-Delete to actually restart the VM itself. But before I came across that, I suspended it, and I was wondering what exactly happens when you suspend the server, because it took like 10 to 15 minutes before I was able to resume it.
Okay, I mean, suspend is actually kind of a pause, but that's fine, Baran. I'll explain. There are certain things you may need to be aware of. We haven't talked about that, and that is what I'm going to talk today. So installation is clear, so that's fine. You try to do that. That's good. So that is exactly what I am going to. You can all see my screen, right? I will talk about that. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is. Okay, go ahead. If you have any questions, please.
Yeah, I have one. What sort of RAID configuration is recommended for an ES server in real time?
It's always, I would recommend strongly, I would recommend RAID 1.
RAID 1. And RAID 1+0 it's the same as RAID 10, right?
Yeah, RAID 1+0 is actually RAID 10. That will come into effect if you have 4 hard disks. You select RAID 1+0, it will be configured as RAID 10. So RAID 1+0 is nothing but actually RAID 10. When you say RAID 10, it is actually a combination of RAID 1 and RAID 0. It's actually striping with mirroring together. That is what the RAID 10 is. RAID 10 gives you much more performance, read and write operations. But the problem with RAID 10 is you need 4 hard disks to configure that, and then you're going to lose 50% of that as mirroring data. So the wastage is more, but the high performance. To install this small, thin 1 GB or 6 GB of altogether ESXi, you may not want to do that. And again, when you come to blade servers and all, you don't get more than 2 hard disks. The maximum hard drives that can put on a blade server is 2. If it is a DL380 or a 580, then you have more drives. But again, I really don't think it is required. High availability in that sense is not required. So RAID 1 is definitely the answer for installing the operating system. There are other techniques which we will talk later. You can install ESXi without a local hard drive. You can install and you can boot it from the SAN itself. Boot from SAN option is there. I will explain how to do that, but it is possible. We won't be able to do that here because I don't have the fiber channel network here. But you can actually boot your ESX server or ESXi from the SAN itself. Meaning, even though your server do not have any hard drive, you can actually boot from SAN. Which is also a practice that companies sometimes do. If you're asking me about my environment in our office, all our servers are pretty much, most of them are blades, and every blade has 2 hard drives, and they are configured as RAID 1s.
So once it is installed, like if I want to increase the size of the data store, is it possible by adding an extra hard disk and extend it?
Sure, you can do that. Yeah, you can add a second hard drive. You can add, so, okay, I understand it. Let me see. Okay, so let's say your current server currently has 2 hard drives. This is what it is today. So you're going to mirror, first thing you need to do is you have to make a RAID 1 partition out of it. So you got a volume. So this is what your installation is going to see. So this is 200 GB hard drives. Let us say when you mirror it, you got an effective 100 GB. Now your installation ESXi is going to see this 100 GB. The ESXi will do is this. It will take the first 1 GB partition, which I know that I showed you that web link, right? That small 4 MB partition, the pre-boot section, the VFAT section, and scratch partition and all that thing. So it will take around 6 GB out of this old hard disk. And what it will do is it will convert the remaining into a VMFS data store. This is actually the data store which can be used to store your VMs. Now, Gene's question is, can I add or increase this data store? This data store cannot be increased now because you only have these 2 drives. But you have an option You can put 2 more hard drives into your server, or you can put 4 more hard drives if you want. If you have 4, you can put 4 or 5 or whatever, how much is available. You know, some servers you can put 4 drives, some you can put 8 drives. The latest DL380 and 385s comes with the option of putting 8 drives. So you can put all these 4 drives, reboot the server, go to the BIOS, and configure the RAID using these 4 drives. In this case, you can use RAID 5 because that is what we prefer for storing. And then this will be the second data store for. So now your server has 2 logical volumes. One is your boot volume where the binary for VMware is installed, and then the remaining is your one data store. And the second one, you can club all these 4 disks together, and you created a RAID 5, which will be your second data store. Clear?
Yeah. So I can separate the hypervisor and the data store on 2 different hard disks. That's also possible, right?
What is that?
Can I store the hypervisor on one hard disk and the data store on a different hard disk?
You can. I mean, that is what you are doing here also, right? In this case, so the remaining, this is actually otherwise a waste. So if you want to waste that, it's fine. You don't need to create a data store there. You can delete that data store. But that is, that is by default. VMware creates that data store. Actually, it needs that data store to create that console there. So you can definitely create. But no, this is not the recommended way. Nobody uses local data store on a ESX server for learning and understanding. Now we are learning about the local data store. But when it comes to SAN and all, we are talking about external data stores, external storage. That is exactly where you have to store because of many functionalities that are available in VMware. If you want to take advantage of those functionalities like vMotion and all, you have to have external storage. So in my company and all our servers are having this data store, but we don't create any VMs in this data store. We always create VMs on the shared data store, which is the external SAN, which you will learn when we get into the clustering and all. At this point, just, this is the normal way of doing it. But you will understand why you should not create VMs on the local data store at a later point, not now. But for now, just do this as a practice. So your question, yes. Why do you want to know what is wrong in having a data store here? There is nothing wrong. So you can leave it there. And it is not going to harm your operating system or anything.
And what is the problem with having a DHCP and not having a static IP address?
DHCP is dynamic host configuration protocol. That's a technique. It's a part of the TCP/IP protocol suite. Microsoft has Microsoft DHCP. There are Unix-based DHCPs. Different companies have different thing, but in general, DHCP is a standard protocol which will give you dynamically or automatic IP address. So every time in a DHCP itself is a process. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but I will tell you quickly. I will tell you if you can understand it, pick it up. When a computer, whether it is a laptop or a desktop or anything, if it is configured to get its IP address. So if you go to the IP address properties of your network card, like this, if you go, you can take your TCP/IP. There are 2 options: obtain an IP address automatically. If this is what is checked, that means you are telling your computer's network card, hey, go and get an IP address automatically. From where? From a DHCP server. If there is a DHCP server available, it will give an IP address to this network card. If it is not, your computer will not get an IP address. It will automatically give an IP address, which is called as automatic IP addressing, which is not going to work. So anyway, you have to have a DHCP server in your network if you want to get an automatic IP address. Here in this particular case, I am using a static IP address. I have given an IP address here. Now the problem with this, so that is what the DHCP difference is. The thing is, when a computer starts up, it sends a broadcast message in the network saying, hey, is there any DHCP server? Give me an IP address. So that is a broadcast package. That packet will go over the network. It's a broadcast actually, okay? So I'm not going to get into the network. Just imagine that a broadcast is a message that will be sent in every angle of the network. And when there is a DHCP server and that server sees that packet coming in the network, it captures that packet, look at that packet and open the packet and see, okay, oh, this server or this computer is asking for a DHCP IP address. Immediately that DHCP server send an acknowledgement message back. You know, when you want to understand that TCP IP is a handshake protocol. It sends an acknowledgement back to that computer by sending another packet saying, hey, you know what, I am a DHCP server, I have IP address, I can give you an IP address. And then that computer says, okay, fine, give me an IP back. It is another message. It is just like a phone conversation. That's why we call it as handshake. It sends the message back to that server. At that point, the DHCP server say, okay, you take this IP address 10.10.10.75. Now that server will get that IP address and it will continue to work. No problems. But the problem is now Gene know that, okay, my server's IP address is 10.10.75. Every day morning when Gene comes, Gene is going to end up at 10.10.10.75 because you know that that was the IP address of your server. DHCP, when it gives an IP address to a computer, it is not a permanent IP address. It gives that IP address based on a lease agreement. It says that, okay, I will give you an IP address, but you keep me updated about your status. If I don't hear from you for a period of time, there is actually an acknowledgement, re-acknowledgement and all is there. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but just imagine if that your server is out of the network or down for a day or 2 days, you know, you can again, normally DHCP lease is 7 days. That means if it gives us an IP address to a computer, it will keep that IP address for 7 days. It won't give it to anybody. But for 7 days, just imagine, for 7 days your server was down. 8th day, when you power on, your server may not get that IP address. It may get, it may not get, because 7 days passed, your DHCP server might have given that IP address to Arvind's computer. Now it will give a new IP address to you. Now your IP address may be 10.10.10.85. So your IP address gets changed. So your computer will work as long as you know the new IP address is 85. So that is why DHCP IP address is not recommended for servers. Now there are other aspects to it, but in a short, you know, Gene, your question is that DHCP IP address, there is a possibility that the IP address might change every time your computer reboots, or maybe, you know, depending on the lease. In some companies, the lease is only in a very tight situation where there is less IP addresses available. The lease period will be small. For example, in my company, our lease agreement is only 24 hours. If I don't hear from a computer for 24 hours, I will give that IP address to somebody else. No, I means the DHCP server. So that's the problem. But if you are given a static IP address, that will never change and that will be always there. You understand?
Yeah. Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
So you have to read about DHCP, you know, how DHCP works. DHCP has something called boot peer relay agent. There is a whole lot of things there. This is all part of Windows Server administration. It is explaining on how DHCP works. But you know, the DHCP, as I said, is not a Microsoft technology. It is not a Linux or Novell technology. It is a standard TCP IP protocol which has some standards, and that is the standard across the globe. So anybody can have a DHCP server, but it works. Even in your house, you have your Comcast or you know, modem. Your modem, that is actually a DHCP IP address. All your computers most probably will be getting an IP address from your modem, which is actually a DHCP server. Even in my house, I have a Comcast modem which gives DHCP IP address to many of my computers. Okay, so it does not mean that DHCP is a service that runs on your computer. Okay.
Thank you.
Booting from SAN is a novel concept. I don't know, Sujan. I'm not a novel guy. Booting from SAN is booting from SAN. It's not a novel concept. Probably a novel might have used that. It is a concept of booting the server from the SAN storage. So it requires certain hardware and and that setting. So if you have that, you can boot from SAN. Even Windows servers can be boot from a SAN. Okay, so guys, so here is a server. This is an ESXi server. You know, as I said, I'm not going to focus on ESX server. So this is an ESX5 server, nothing different. ESXi or ESX 5.1, there is not much difference. I mean, some new features are there on 5.1. I think we will look into it. But generally, this is an ESX server. I'm going to quickly go through some of the properties to make you guys familiar with the server and what you need to look and what are the things. And then we'll get on to some building some VMs and things like that. So this is basically the home page of a ESX server when you get in. If you go here, actually, let me show you here. This is called as the home page of a server. Here you can see some logs, you know, some of your ESX server logs you can see. This is generally used when you are actually troubleshooting with server. We will talk about logs in detail when we get on to vCenter. Roles. Basically, there are 3 roles. Roles are a set of permissions. You can assign a role to a particular user, and that user will get what all permissions are set in that role. So that is what it is. This is not much very important here, because when we get on to vCenter and all, you're going to see many more roles. That is exactly we use. Normally, nobody configures this role. But in a ESX server, by default, there are 3 roles. One is called no access. No access means there is no access. It is nothing to do here. Read only is another thing. Read only access means if I create a user called Sujan inside this ESX server, and if I give Sujan read only access, Sujan can log into this server using his username and password instead of root. Sujan can log in with Sujan's ID and password, but he will only get read only access. He cannot do anything. He can see everything. Administrator means you can see everything. So you can see that these are the users that are currently in this particular ESX server, ESXi server. These are the users, the root. DCUI is the direct console user interface. That is actually a pre-configured user account that is used for when you connect through the ILO, you see that yellow screen where you enter your the name, IP address and all, right, in ESXi. That window and that screen is actually managed by that account, and you are not supposed to change the password of it. It is controlled by the server itself. And VPX user is also, we will talk about VPX user later. This is actually part of a vCenter user. This server, which I am explaining you now, is actually part of a vCenter. That's why you see that user. We will talk about this user and how this user get created and all when we talk about vCenter. So basically, this is a thing you can actually you cannot make any changes here. This is actually, you can create a new role if you want. This is our roles, but roles are explained later. I'm not going to talk about it now. We will, when we get on to vCenter, we will talk about roles and permissions in detail. But these are all the roles. So I can create a user and I can give him explicit permissions, what I can do. If let's say I create a user called Arvind, and if I want Arvind only to manage virtual machines, but I don't want Arvind to make any changes to network, I don't want Arvind to make any changes to storage, I don't want him to change the IP address or anything, I can create a user called custom underscore VM underscore user role, and then I will come here in the VM itself. In the VM itself, I can go very granular level, very much granular level. We will learn this later, but since we came here, I'm explaining this. I can come here and say, okay, what is Arvind wants to do? All I want is Arvind to start a VM, power on a VM, install an operating system inside it, do those things. So I can come here, I can come to the configuration part. I don't want him to add any machines or anything, so I can come here. Basically here I don't need to give him any rights on the configuration part. I will give him all these rights. I will give him interaction. He can secure this thing, answer a question. He can configure CD to install. He can configure floppy drive. He can power on and power off a VM. All these, I can instead of that I can give him all these roles. So interaction, inventory, I can give him all the roles. pretty much that is it, and then some snapshot. We will learn about snapshots later. This is the thing. So I created now a role called custom VM user, and if I create a user called Aravind, and if I give him this role, Aravind can log on to this ESX server like this, and he can get in here. He can actually, he will not be seeing all these options. It all will be grayed out for him because he don't have the rights. Only thing Aravind can do is he can create a new virtual machine and probably do certain things. So that way, that granular level, you can go and customize and give permission. So in a VMware environment, the entire permissions are done by using roles, and it is done very carefully by using the administrators. Administrators do a very thorough look at how they give the permissions, and it can be controlled to a very, very small level also. It's very granular. You can see that when you go into the roles, you can see that how granular you can go. How much granular you can go. And I just showed you only a virtual machine thing. Just for example, you take a networking role. You can see that you can create many things. Or if you take a data store, you can see that every feature has many subgroups and sub features. So based on that, you can actually decide what a user can do. This is how you basically control how much things and what things a person can do in an ESX server. Even when it comes to virtual machine, that is the one that has many subcategories. You can go to granular level. In our office, when we have a workstation or desktop administrators across the globe, they wanted to create virtual machines. They may want to power off and power on a virtual machine. They may want to reboot a virtual machine. They may want to add or delete a hard disk from a computer. That is fine. I can give them explicit rights to do that job. Rather, they won't be doing any ESX administration. So you are a member of a department that deals with workstations, Windows XP and Windows 7, and definitely you should have the rights to manage those VMs. So I can go this level and give you rights, custom rights based on what you can do. This is the same case I do with our storage administrators. When the storage guys come, we want the storage administrator to present SAN storage to our ESX servers. But I don't want him to reboot my ESX servers. I don't want him to create virtual machines. I don't want him to make any changes to the networking. All I can give him is, all I need to give him is, he should be able to present storage to the servers, maybe add it, configure it. That's it. In that case, I will create another role called custom role called storage administrators. Then I will come to the data store. You see this? In the data store, allocate space, browse data store, configure data store, low level, these operations I can give. If I give this to Samrat, let's say if he is a SAN administrator, he will only get these rights. You getting? That is the power of roles. I hope you got an idea. Now the remaining things, you guys, you have to read. See, there is a lot of things, and don't expect that I'm going to go through every block and explain what this is. I won't be doing that. This is something you have to work. You don't need to, it's a general stuff, but once you understand what that is, I think it is pretty clear, correct? So that is the roles and all. And then when it comes to the inventory, this is what an ESX server. So you are connected to a ESX server, and we're going to look at some of the properties of the ESX server. What are the typical roles you had set up previous data? Do you really give storage team handle VMware storage part? No, in our office we don't give them the storage rights. We manage the storage, but our storage guys have access to the VMware environment. They have not full rights, but they do have the rights, but they don't create data stores, but they present the storage. And they do the scanning, and so that they make sure that all the ESX servers can see the storage, and then they will inform us, and then we create the data stores. There is always an understanding between the storage team and the VMware administrators always, because when you name a data store with some name, it is a good practice to tell them that, okay, this storage ID or this LUN I have configured with this data store. So later when you are troubleshooting, or when you have a slowness issue, or when you have some latency problems, it is very easy for a storage administrator to take a look at that particular line. If you simply give him, hey, you know what, I have a problem on my VM storage 008 underscore Vmax. If I give that name, you don't know what that means. You have to give him the storage ID and things like that. So at the time of creating a storage, you may want to tell him. So I think that is a topic that we should not be discussing now. But Shri, since you asked that question, I just mentioned it. We will talk about that when we get on to the shared storage. Okay. Okay. So quickly here, so this is the homepage of a ESX server or ESXi server. You can see the general tab where it will give you many details. It will give you the HP model, the CPU processors, the number of cores, number of sockets, and all. So let me ask you one question here quickly. How many of you know what a socket is and what a core is? What is a core? When you talk about processors, we talk about dual core processors, core to duo and all. You might have been familiar with it. Dual core processors, quad core processors. What is a core and what is a socket? Here itself, you can see that processor sockets 2, processor cores 2. Anybody else other than Sri? No answers? One socket for one processor. Okay. Any other answers? It's very important to understand sockets and processors when you come to VMware ESX servers, because VMware ESX server licenses are based on sockets, not based on the number of cores or the processors. So I'm going to explain that now. That is very important to understand what a processor socket and what a processor core means. So have you seen processor socket? Let me go to a picture and show you a picture. Have you seen processors? How many of you have seen processors? Okay, so these are all pictures, or these are different pictures of different CPUs here. I'm not going to get into the internals of how a silicon chip is configured, how the wafers are cut. I'm not going to get into that. How the machine language works. We don't need to talk about all that things. A processor socket is something like this. You might have seen this if you have a computer or a pen. This is actually a processor socket. Or here you are seeing is actually a processor socket. This processor socket has so many pins on the back of it. This is the front of it and this is the back of it. And then you put this socket onto the motherboard. Every motherboard will have a socket, a female adapter, and you put that processor right on it. It is called as processor. I mean, that's a layman term, but I'm going to explain you what it is. So here in this picture, if you look, this is actually a motherboard. Inside a motherboard, you can see right here a processor socket is being placed. Nowadays, if you are taking any DL creative servers or something, you can see there are options to put 2 sockets. If you take a 580 or something, you may see an option to put 4 sockets. When it comes to some very old level servers, not old level, 100 series servers, or maybe your laptop, or maybe take your desktop, you will only have 1 processor socket. You can put 1 socket. So that is actually a socket. So a socket is this physical piece of metal is called a socket. So a socket is actually a container. So nowadays, because of the VLSI, very large scale integration techniques and all, the researchers and the scientists or whoever is hardware engineers, they are able to integrate multiple processors inside a socket. So in old days, if you are going back to 6-7 years back, this is how it was. One processor is like this. This is actually one processor. If I ask you to write this, what is this? I will write it like this. It is a single core, single socket processor. It is a single core, single socket processor. That is what it is called. Because this is one socket and inside this socket there is one CPU. That was the case earlier, and then there came something called as multi-threading, hyper-threading and all. I'm not going to talk that, but if anybody wants to understand, just do some Google research and research about what is hyper-threading. Hyper-threading is a feature, Intel's feature, where you can do multi-threaded applications or multi-threading inside one CPU. Okay, so this is a single socket, single processor. Now, then comes the next version of the processors. It is again one socket, but that one socket is actually divided into two processors. So there is one CPU here, and then there is another CPU. So this is a single socket dual core processor. Okay, single socket, that means it is still one piece, one metal piece, single socket dual core. What that means is there is actually two CPUs, two processors, central processing unit, two processors inside this. So in layman term you can say it's one processor, and that's not correct, but this is actually two processors sandwiched inside a socket because of the new technologies like VLSI and all that kind of integration. It's all done on very thin wafers of silicon. So that is how this is being created. It's basically, diodes and, AND gates and OR gates, a combination of AND gates and OR gates. I don't know how many of you know that level, but it is basically a circuit of AND gates and OR gates, arithmetic logic unit and all those things. So it's actually, if you know CPUs, you have to go to Wikipedia or something to understand what a processor is. But here what I'm talking is this is one socket, two processors. Technology is improving. So today you can get one socket like this. You can get one socket which can have 4 processors inside because the technology is improving. You know that a hard disk was big earlier. A computer was the size of a room earlier, but now today, your iPhone is actually a computer. So this is actually a single socket quad core processor. This is having 4 processors inside one socket. Today the latest processors from AMD is having 16 cores, and the latest processors from Intel, I believe Intel is also having, there is a competition going between Intel and I think the G8 Sandy Bridge processors are capable of 16 cores, but most of the Intel processors. So if you go to the HP site, I think now you will understand. If you go to hp.com and you go to servers, you can see if I go to this Intel DL server series, I'm going to take this DL 300 series servers. Look at this particular server. Let us just take this Intel this server, this the third one on the thing. Here it says processor family. It says it's Intel Xeon processors. Number of processors. Here it says it is actually says 2 or 1. That means you can put 2 sockets or 1 socket. That is what this means. Look at the next line. Processor core available. How many? You can get it in 8 core processors, 6 core processors, 4 or 2 cores. You can get dual core, quad core, 6 core or 8 core processors are available. Look at an AMD processor here on the one here. The mouse is here. It is available in 16 cores also. So though the naming is little different, guys understand this processor means that is the socket they are talking about. When actual processor means a core. A core is actually a processor. Okay. So this is actually a quad core processor. That means there are 4 CPUs inside this. It is equivalent to 4 physical CPUs. But because of the technology, they merged that thing inside it. So this is actually a single socket quad core processor. So you can today buy single socket 16 core processors from AMD if possible. And it is possible, and it is highly recommended for virtualized environment because you need so much of processing power. A single socket 16 core processor is very costlier than a single socket dual core processor. Now comes to the point. VMware licenses are based on sockets and not based on the number of processors. Okay, again I'm telling you, ESX server licenses are based on sockets and not based on processor cores or processors. So let me take you to let me say this is my HP server, and this HP server has 2 sockets here, and each of these socket is actually a dual core processor. So there are total 4 processors in this particular server. Correct? There are 4 processors. Tell me how many ESX server license I need if I want to license this server. One ESX server license is approximately around $6,000. So if you have a server like this, how many licenses you need? You need only 2 licenses. But how many processors you get from this? 4. Okay, instead of this, I can actually do another thing, right? I can buy a server with 1 socket, with quad core processor. Now how many license I need for this server? I need only 1 license, but I am getting the effect of 4 processors. Is this cheap or this cheap? Because here I have to pay $10,000 for my license. Here I have to pay only $5,000 because I have only 1 socket. So you have to imagine, or you have to think in that way. The more cores, better you are, because you don't need to pay too much money for sockets. So if you can buy a 16 core socket, definitely it will be little costlier, but it will be cheaper than comparing the cost of the license. So in my office and all, most of our servers today that are coming are blade servers. These blade servers are like this, and they normally come with 2 sockets, and each of these sockets are basically 16 core or 8 core sockets. I am saying it is 16 core sockets. It will be 16 cores inside this. If this is 16 core, tell me how many processors I will have in this server. This is 2 processors. How many licenses I need for this server? And how many processors are there in this server? I need only 2 licenses for this server, even though it's a very powerful server and it has 32 processors. So that is the advantage, and that is what the technology is going. VMware had a different, they introduced a new licensing scheme in 2011. It is called as VRAM, because they see that the people are getting advantage of this. So they also limited people saying, okay, if you can use 1 socket, then you can only have like 96 GB of memory. If you use more than 96 GB of memory, let us say in this case, you have 2 processors, so you cannot use more than 186 GB RAM. If your ESX server is having 200 GB RAM, according to VMware, you have crossed that 96 GB limit, so you have to pay 1 more license. That was called as the VRAM. You don't need to worry about it now, because that has been cancelled. There was a huge protest from the people and different businesses against that way of doing that. They tried to make some money out of it. I think that was a very bad move. With this 2011, 2 weeks back in San Francisco, they announced that they are cancelling that VRAM technology. So there is no more VRAM. I just mentioned that here because those who are interested can do some research about VRAM. What is VRAM from things that is gone? VRAM. That was a licensing scheme they introduced, but that is no more there. Right now the licensing is based on it. The licenses of ESX servers are based on the number of sockets and not based on the number of processors. If this server, I have 32 processors, I have 32 CPUs, or I can say I have 32 cores. A core is a processor. This is not a processor. This is a socket with 16 processors inside it because of the VLSI, VLSI, very large scale integration. And nowadays, actually, a friend of mine is working in San Diego. He is actually working on VLSI, very large scale integration. That's how you are able to see smaller and smaller hardware coming up. That's how the technologies are growing, because of the integration, the power of integration. Which would be more powerful, single socket with multiple cores or two sockets with less core? No, there is no comparison. A core is a core. A core is a processor. Whether you have one core or two cores, it depends on the thing. So it doesn't matter. One core with more CPU, one socket with more CPUs, or multiple sockets with less CPU, the cores does not have any effect. In effect, you will have the sum of the CPUs. If you have 10 CPUs, and what is the sum of the power of that CPU, that is what it matters. There is no concept about more cores, less power, nothing like that. Each processor is a processor. Okay, so that is licensing. So that is what it is. So here in this particular server, I have, tell me now how many sockets I have and how many cores I have in this processor. So you can look here, you can see that processor sockets 2. Cores per socket is 2. So that is dual core processors. So I have a total of how many processors here? I have 4. So how many licenses I need for this server? I need 2 licenses, but I have 4 processors. Is that clear? Very important point. Okay, VMware licenses are very important, and this is how you calculate. So if you are intelligent, and if you have the chance, or if you have an opportunity to buy more cores, sockets with more cores, I strongly recommend to go for that, because by you will be getting more CPUs, and you have to still pay only the same amount for the licenses. Okay, so that is what it is. So this is the general thing, and we will be learning some other things. That's all not part of it now, but this will give you an overall idea about your server. Here in the resources side, you can see that the total CPU is currently used. You see this server has 2.4 gigahertz processors. See that? 2.4 gigahertz processors. You have 4 CPUs. You see that? CPU cores. That is what a CPU is. So I have 4 CPUs or 4 processors in this server, which is 4 CPUs into 2.4 gigahertz. That means I have a total capacity of how much? 9.4 gigahertz processing power is there on my server. Out of the 9.4, I'm using only 12 megahertz at this point. So I still have a lot of processing power remaining on this server. When it comes to memory, look at it. I have a capacity of 16 GB memory is there on this server. Guys, today 16 GB is not a big deal. In our office, I told you some of our VMs are running with 64 GB RAM. But in my lab, I don't think I need 16 GB or 4 GB. You know, I just need to teach here. But in a real life environment, when you go to a company, you see servers running with a huge amount of memory. So let me tell you, I'll give you an example. In our company, most of our servers, ESX servers, are running with 196 GB RAM, and some of them are running with 256 GB RAM. That is our typical configurations. Because our servers are small, they are blade servers. If I was using a DL580 or something, I would have gone up to 1 terabyte. But since we are using smaller blades, and we don't want to overpopulate, I can still add the latest blade servers. I think the latest blade servers come with a capacity of, again, you have to go to HP site to see that. I can show you the maximum capacity of these ESX HP servers. I think it varies, again, to the servers. Okay, if you take this one of the server, you can see that, see the maximum memory. This server can support up to 384 GB RAM. But do you want to buy 384 or not? It is your choice. Okay, so that's how it is. See, so UCS blades, I don't think 98 GB is correct, Satya. UCS blades I have seen UCS blades can support up to 512 GB RAM. 98 GB is very small. So sometimes you may buy only 98 GB because there are other reasons. When I get into the clustering, I will explain. There is actually something called a VM to host ratio. That means you may not want to run 25 or 30 mission critical VMs on one server, because what happens if that server goes down? If that server goes down all of a sudden because of a hardware problem or a other problem, you are basically affecting 50 plus virtual machines which are business critical servers. So do you want to take that kind of a risk? So big companies that are having more financial stability, they might go for a smaller size server, meaning the host to VM ratio will be smaller. In our office, we typically keep a 12:1 ratio. Our Blade servers, we only keep 12 VMs per host. I can make that Blade server to configure with 32 processors and 512 GB RAM, and I can put 30 VMs there. Absolutely possible. But do I need to? Is it my question? That is actually a design aspect of an architect. He has to design whether how critical is this server. So we do have some servers in our VDI environment. We do have some of the ESX servers running 50 VMs. But when it comes to our production application servers, we don't do 50 on a per host. So we will buy more hosts to spread our load. Okay. All right, so that is what this memory thing is, and the thing is, so buying a server and all is, I don't think you guys need to worry about it now. Buying a server and all is people who has that knowledge. I do a lot of my time in the purchasing and order, depending on what type of processors. You have to look at many aspects when you're buying a server. Does it comes with the correct drivers? You cannot have a different type of hardware. It may have a different HBAs, or it may have a different Messini card. It may have different controllers. You need to make sure that everything is fit inside your company. But if you are buying a fresh new server, you don't need to worry. But when you are in a big environment where there is already servers, you don't need to worry about it. I don't think any one of you have to worry about it, as long as even if you're going to work, I don't think anybody will ask you to, create a spec for a server. If that comes, it may be a different story. Okay, don't have to worry about it. This is the storage. Storage in ESX servers, it is called as these are called this is the storage. You can see all the storage attached to your servers. You can see that. Okay. And here comes the network. We will learn about those things later. This server currently has only one network. What is this and all, we will see. So that is general thing. Here you can see the list of virtual machines, and you can see the state of the virtual machine, how much space is actually used, how many CPUs are there, how much memory is configured. Since these are all powered off, that's why it's not showing anything. But you can see all the information here about the current memory size, how many CPUs are there, and things like that you can see from here. You can actually, there is a customization. You can check whatever you want. If you want to see the DNS name, if you want to see how many network cards are there, you can check that, and it will give you here all that information, NIC count, CPU count, everything, DNS name. So you can customize that if you want. Okay, 1 minute, guys. Okay, guys. Okay, so that is what it is. We will. These are all general things. I'm just driving you to show you what exactly it is. Right, and storage and all we'll talk. How the storage is produced. Storage is actually your hard disk. That is what the storage is. When you install an ESX server, it by default creates a data store. I'll talk about that quickly. So coming to resource allocation, here it will show you some capacity allocation. So you can see that who's using how much, what is the total capacity, how much is used. There is no explanation. This is self-explanatory. You can actually go through here and see the storage, memory, and CPU allocations by looking at these things. So when you build a server, take a look at all these things and see what is happening. This will give you some general purpose overview. There is nothing can be configured here. This will give you some real-time statistics here. Performance in an ESX server, actually it will give you information about memory, hold on 1 minute, guys. Okay, hold on. Okay. Hey, Natraj. No, Natraj, actually, I'm actually stuck with some work. So, what time is the election actually? 3:15, 3 o'clock? What time? You know, I'm actually stuck with some work. So, you carry on, but I will come. I will be coming. Are you carrying your cell with you? So, can you give me a ring when that whatever that voting or something is about to start? Maybe 10 minutes before I will stop by. Okay, please. Okay, because I'm actually stuck there. So, if you can let me know like 10, 15 minutes early, I will come there. Yeah, I will try to come by 3:15 then. And how long this will last? How long it will take? Oh, that's okay. Cool. No problem. So I'll be there by 3:50. Thanks. Okay, guys. So we'll take a break at 3:15. Okay, and then I'll come back by 3:45. So half an hour break. Maybe you guys can go through it. So this is the performance here. This is some performance. So you can see the performance of your ESX server. All these counters. We will learn about this in detail when we get into vCenter. There is actually a thing I wanted to tell you here. For example, this server has been running for so many days. It has been running for, I think it's been 46 days remaining. That means this has been running for quite some days. I want to see what was the CPU utilization day before yesterday, 12 o'clock. I can go to the chart options, but I can only go to, if you go to the custom, there is actually no custom here. You can see that in an ESX server, if you go directly, you can only get information about the last 8 to 12 hours. I think it's only last quite some time. You know, let me see how much. I think you can go only up to, I don't know how much it is. I don't use this normally, but I think you can only see for the last 1 hour. That's what you can see. The last 1 hour is the only option you can see. If you want to see what was the CPU utilization today morning or yesterday evening, you cannot see from this performance window. This is something like a real-time information. So you can see that it's almost 3 o'clock now. You can see the CPU and memory and disk and all this information you can see, but you can only see that information. This is the disk read write. You know, you can see the different things are there. We will talk about this in late detail because this is not the way you should look at the performance of a ESX server. The performance of a ESX server is done through the vCenter. So this here you can only see last 1 hour of information. Why that is? Because to store this performance data, it requires a lot of space. It requires a database. Your small footprint ESXi or ESX server do not have a database or anything. This information is stored in the memory. It is showing real-time information here, but you will not be able to see historical data by using this. If you want to see historical information, you have to use the VMware vCenter server. That is all. That is where the vCenter server come into picture. vCenter server store all this information in its database. So you can go back to year or 3 years or 5 years back. If I want to see what was the CPU utilization of my server last year, February 23rd, I can go there and see that information. Because vCenter server collects this information and store all this information in its database. But ESX server by itself does not have that capability, and it is not meant for that. It cannot store all that information. So here you will see a quick 1 hour information, but if you want to see more than that, you have to use vCenter. That is where the vCenter will come into picture. What should be the vCenter DB size for a typical real-time environment? I don't want to talk now about those things. I know these questions will come from your mind. No problem. We'll talk when we talk about vCenter. Okay. vCenter databases, it can go up to terabytes if you want, but it depends on how many hosts, how many VMs, how much data you want to store, things like that. You can define how much data you want to store in the data, in the database. What time interval do you want to store? Every 5 minutes data points, or you want once a week, things like that. We will see those differences and the size differences. I can show you when we get into vCenter. Okay. So this is basically the performance. There is nothing but you guys can actually take a look at some of the counters and things like that. It will give you information about most of the stuff in this server. Coming to local users and groups, it will show you the users and group. Again, you cannot create any user. You can actually create users here, but it is not recommended to create users. I can create user like Arvind and give him a read-only access or something like that, but it is highly recommended not to create any users on your ESX server directly. Unless otherwise, if that is your only one ESX server in your environment and you are only using that to keep some VMs, yeah, probably. But in an enterprise level, you should never create any users or groups inside an ESX server. This is where the users are, and this is what it is. The root is the only user. Here you can actually come and you can change the password or things like that. You can do that. But other than that, VPX user, DC UI user, you should never change the passwords. These passwords are managed by the kernel itself. So it's recommended not to change. If you change the passwords, it may work, but it could create problems sometimes in a later stage. So don't make any changes here, but this is where you can see the users and groups. Events tab. Events tab will give you every action happening on the server. This is again stored in the real time, but when you have vCenter, you can go back to events months and years back, and you can trace for what has happened on the server, who connected to the server, who did what, who powered on a VM, who deleted the VM, who created the network, what VM was moved. Every information, every event or each and every event happened on your server will be logged here, and you can see all that information from this events tab. The permission tab is the one that will give you the roles. You can see that. These are the users and these are the roles, and you can see where it is defined. So right now I have clicked on the parent, the main ESX server. You can see that the root is a user and he is having the role administrator. The root is able to do everything because root has the administrator role. And you know that the administrator role has everything, right? So I can actually, like I was telling earlier, I can actually go here and create a user called Arvind. I'm just showing here, and let me give him a password 12345, and I can give him to a group, or I can give him to users. I'm just giving. So I created a. So I created a user called Arvind, and now if I want, I can come here and I can give Arvind permission. I click on this server. If I want to give Arvind permission, what permission? How do I give Arvind permission? I cannot come here and give permission to Arvind. So I select here, I come to this thing, I will select Arvind from here, add. Now Arvind is selected, and now I can select from here what role I can give him. I'm going to give him custom VM user role. So now Arvind can do what this role can do. You understand? This is how you do the permission. You don't need to worry about this now. I strongly recommend you. I mean, you can learn this by now, but that's good. This is how you do the customization. So first you define your role and you apply permission to users based on roles. So in VMware, every permission is done using roles and not with any other permissions. So what a role can do, that is what it is. A user can be a member of multiple roles, but then the effective permissions and all will come into it. So that is more advanced, but just to make you understand, permissions are done based on roles. Okay. So let us come back to the configuration. So I think I covered all these things. There is nothing much here. These are all self-explanatory, and I'm moving fast because I think that is more than enough for people like you to understand. We have much more complex things to understand and learn. Okay, so I'm not going to go there. So let me get on to the configuration tab here. So this is the most important tab, and this is where you do all the configuration information of your server. Guys, just remind me when it is 3:15. Okay, I got to run actually. And I will be back as soon as possible. But you guys can build maybe I will give the control to Aravind. Aravind, you can drive it, and maybe anybody wants to show something. You guys can build some server. Maybe you can have some discussion. Please have that for 15 to 20 minutes, guys. I'll be back as soon as possible. Okay, and we will continue the class. I have to finish quite a part of networking today, and that is what I'm looking for. Health status tab. There is again nothing. This is nothing to be configured. You can see the health status here. This is again, remember, now you have to go back to that ESXi's architectural diagram I showed. If you remember that picture in your mind, you know that there was a SIM, common inside management module was inside the VM kernel, right? That manages the hardware. Okay, hold on. Yeah, not Raj. Okay, I will come now then. Okay. Hey guys, I got to run. So let us do one thing. I'll come back and do it. I will give. I'm making Aravind. I'm making you the presenter.
Okay.
So you can control, guys. You can see Aravind's screen. Maybe you guys can discuss. But I will be back probably in half an hour, guys. If you want, take a break. But we will continue after I come back. Okay. Sorry for this, but please continue. You can. Aravind, okay. I'm going to mute myself, but can you talk?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I think everyone can hear. So, guys, please have.
Hello. Yes, yes. Yes,
yeah.
Aravind.
Yeah, I'm going to connect to one of the VMs, like the ESX. So we'll start from there, and we can massage the configurations and all that stuff. Also, by the way, I sent an email to everyone about using the recording software. Did you get the email? Okay. Let's log on to this server if this is available.
Probably we will talk probably a little bit more. Maybe I can pass some of my comments and suggestions and best practices when we get into the storage section. Now, I think, yeah, RAID and all is general concepts. But I think you guys will get a little bit more insight into what exactly storage is once we start the storage section, because there are different type of storage, different technologies, different protocols, a different way of accessing it, managing it. So I think we will talk about that in detail when we get on to the storage section.
Okay.
And also that what Aravind is doing right now is a good practice. I've seen that people are disconnecting. So whenever you're done with the work, it's always a good practice to log off from that server. That will actually does not leave any state connections on the server. Okay, so I'm taking the control here, guys.
Sure, take it over.
So sorry keeping so long. Actually, that meeting is still going on. We have a community here, and we have some common area where our kids play, and there is some objections on that, and there is some voting going on. So I have to contribute there. So that's why. So
is it a HYA meeting?
I'm sorry.
Is it a HYA meeting?
No, it's our association meeting. Yes, homeowners. Yeah. Yes, correct. Okay. All right. So let's move on. So we talked about it, and I'm going to talk about this configuration thing. I think everybody is there, right? So here is the thing. So I'm going to start again, unless if you don't have any other questions or comments. Yeah, the formula I was using was n minus 1 into the smallest size of the disk. That is only for RAID 5. Okay, so coming to health status, health status is nothing, you cannot do anything. It basically gives you an overall idea about the health of your servers. Typically in big companies, this is not the right way they monitor the hardware. They have different technologies. For example, HP servers, HP has HP Systems Insight Manager. Dell has a Dell Open Manage. These are very powerful hardware monitoring tools from the vendors itself, and that is what most companies do, and that will alert if there is any problems or anything. For example, day before yesterday in my office, we have one of our critical SQL server, one of the 8-node SQL cluster, one of the node had a memory module failure. We got alerts. By the time the cluster failed over to another node, then we called HP. HP has a 4-hour turnaround time. Normally, it depends on how you purchased your support contract. Typically, for big companies, it will be 4 hours. Within 4 hours, wherever it is, whatever it is, HP is supposed to come and replace that hardware. That is what the agreement is. So there is actually something called care pack you can buy as part of the server. So a lot of people think that when buying a server, that's the cost of it, but that's not the way the companies make money from the care pack, support pack. So they do charge a lot of money when you have a hardware, and that is one of the another reason why people don't want to use hardware anymore. They wanted to go more and more with virtual machines. Okay, so these are things, it will give you some updates about status. It will give you the temperature and all those things. You can see that the status of the hardware. Nothing much to here. General topic. Processors, again, there is nothing you can do here. You can see some of the properties. General proper processor properties and things like that. Memory part, again, same thing. You can see that there is 16 GB RAM on this server. The system is taking 78.9 MB. That means the kernel is currently using 78 MB, and the remaining memory is actually available for your virtual machines. So you can actually use this amount of memory, or more than this actually. We will learn about that later for your virtual machines. Coming to storage, these are something I'm quickly going. There is nothing much, but we will be coming back to these areas once we get on to individual module. I'm just trying to give you an overall idea about the ESX server, what are the touch points here. So we will talk about these things later. And I think there is nothing much to explain. That's why. Storage is actually basically they are called as data stores. When you configure data store is actually, if you click on it, you can see that this is their data store. This data store, it is actually, if you look here, you can see that it is formatted with the file system VMFS 5.54. This is the latest file system. This is ESX5. Again, that's an important point. From ESX5 onwards, the version of the file system is 5.x and above. Any servers, ESX 3.0, 3.5, 4, and 4.1, the VMFS file system is version 3. 3.x, it will change with some minor changes. So in ESX 5 onwards, the file system is 5.5 or 5.x, I would say. And there is also a block size. I will talk about it when we get on to storage again. In VMFS 5, there is only one block size, whereas in a VMFS 3 environment, there are 4 different types of block sizes. Block size 1 MB block size, 2 MB block size, 4 MB, and 8 MB block size. There are reasons why you need to have that block size, and VMware understand that there are problems associated with it, and that's why they changed it. We will talk about the block sizes in ESX4 when we get onto the storage section of it. So a storage formatted with VMFS file system is called as a data store. A data store is actually the storage where you can keep your virtual machine. If you look at this box also, you can see that if you look here in this server and go to the configuration tab and click on the storage, You can see that in this server you have multiple data stores. It's loading. This is my old server. It's a ESX 3.5. So here you see there are multiple data stores in this particular server. This is a 279 GB data store. If you right click and go to the properties, you can see the same thing. It's nothing but we will look into the properties of this thing. What is an extent, changing the name, and all those things we will learn later. But here you can see that the file system is version 3.3, and the block size, you see that here it is block size of 2 MB, and there is also a point that says maximum file size is 512 GB. What that is, what this block is, we will talk later. But what I'm trying to explain here is a storage, this is actually a hard disk. So if you actually look here, you can see that it is actually, again, you don't understand this, I was explaining. You will understand this. What is VMHBA 1:2:0:1? That is actually the real hard disk, what you're talking about. The hard disk, or not the hard disk, actually, the RAID volume, the logical volume behind this data store is what disks. If you really want to see what that is, you can click on the storage adapters, and you click on the array controller. You can see that this is the smart array controller. This is the controller that will allow you to make these RAID volumes. If you click on that RAID array controller, you can see that the actual disks here. You can see that there is VMHBA:1:0:0. I know that this is the first logical volume Deepu created using 2 RAID disks. Whether it is part of a RAID 1 or RAID 5, you never can figure it out from a ESX server. Therefore, if you want to understand whether it is RAID 1 or whether it is RAID 5, you have to get onto the BIOS to check that. There is no way ESX server can tell you that. But this is my first logical volume, I can say. This is my second logical volume, and this is my third logical volume. If you really, I know it personally, since I know it, I'm telling you, this is actually 2 drives, RAID 1. This is 2 300 GB drives I configured as RAID 1, and this is another 2 300 GB drives I configured as RAID 1. So there are basically 6 drives on this server. I created 3 RAID 1s to do that. Maybe somebody is asking why you did that. I could have clubbed these 4 300 GB drives, and I could have created one single volume of RAID 5, which would have given me maybe another 100 GB more. But there are some reasons, this is how it happened to be, because as Gene was asking earlier, I had this drive first, and then later I purchased some 2 other disks, and then after a long time I added 2 other drives. So that's how it ended up in like this, but this is not probably the right way to do it. So you can have different options of creating. So that is what a storage is actually. A storage formatted with, or a logical volume formatted with VMFS file system is called as a data store. Adding storage to a VM is a totally different issue. We haven't talked about that. We haven't looked at the VMs at this point, right? We're talking about the host ESX server. Don't confuse. I know still some of my networking guys in my office, they still come say, EXVM. They say VM host, VM server, things like that. That's not correct. The right word, you are a professional. You are learning this technology. You have to manage this environment. So when we talk about certain technological terms, be very particular on that. You cannot call ESX server as an EX server. I know I heard people talking about EX server, ES server, VM server. No, that's not the right name. It is an ESX host or ESX server. So always make sure that you use the right terminologies, and that has a big impact when you go for interviews. Okay. So that is storage. In this server, I believe this server, if I have more, let us say I had at the time of building, I told you also when you install ESX server, it picks the first logical drive, it installs the ESXi in the first 6 GB partition, and it formats the remaining partition with VMFS. Let us say the server you picked up had 2 logical drives. In that case, it is not automatically going to create the second logical drive. The second logical drive will be there, but at that point, if you want to add that second logical drive to the server, you have to come here and click the Add Storage button. When you click on the Add Storage button, you get this option, Disk LUN. So here you can see create a data store on a fiber channel storage, iSCSI storage, or a local SCSI disk. We are now learning, we are now talking about local SCSI drives only. If you want to add any of these type of storage, you click Next, and if it is there, it is available, or if your kernel can see that, it will list here. Right now, this means that there is no other logical drives available on the server. There was one, and that is what this is. Okay? So if, let us say, if I want to create another local storage to the server, I can shut down the server, go and put 2 more hard drives to this, create a RAID volume, RAID 1 or RAID 0, and then I start the server, then I come back here, go to Add Storage, click Next. I will be seeing a line that says VMHBA : 0 : 1 : something with that size, and then I click Next and add. We will be learning that more later, but that is how you add a new storage or a new data store to a server. Since I come here, I just wanted to show you ESX server supports one more file system, which is NFS. All this time I was telling that you can create VMs only on a VMFS file system. That is not absolutely correct. ESX server has one exception. It will allow you to create virtual machines on a NFS file system also. So you can use NFS. NFS over the period has improved. NFS is a totally different protocol. It is a file-based protocol, a TCP/IP-based protocol. It has improved a lot in the last few years because a lot of companies are looking towards network file system because it is much cheaper. But it is not a very high performance storage. So if you want to store some temporary files or temporary VMs, I would recommend you to use a network file system. It is much cheaper. You can create an NFS file system if you have a Linux or any kind of Unix environment. Even Windows servers from 2008 onwards, you can have NFS service there. You can create NFS volumes there. You can go to Best Buy and buy NAS, NFS supported NAS devices. You can do that. So we will look into it. I have NAS NFS storage here. We will add NFS storage. We will learn about NFS. But since I came here, I just wanted to talk about it. But you don't need to worry about this at this point. We will talk about this thing. This is how you add a storage by using disk LUN option. So this is the same thing or the same button you need to use to add storage to your ESX server, to create a data store to your ESX server, whether it is a local storage or whether it is an external storage. Let me again talk about that. Local storage is nothing but the storage that is connected directly to your server, meaning the hard disks that are available on the server itself. And external storage is something we're talking about from a SAN array. Okay? So that is storage. We will come back about storage so you guys know what it is. You can delete a storage. You can do like one important thing. If you delete a storage, there is an option here actually called unmount. Unmount is okay. You can probably add it back. You will get everything. Unmount does not format this thing. But if you delete a storage, it will remove that whole thing from your server and you will never get it back. Because once you delete it, it is gone, and then if you want to re-add it back, you have to reformat it. When you reformat it, what happens? All your data will be wiped off. So never ever try to delete a data store thinking that you can add it back. Okay? And don't even try that on your main server. But now you can try, but in your test servers. But when it comes to a real environment, you should not do that. Again, if there is virtual machines there and the virtual machines are powered on, the ESX will not allow you to delete it. That is actually a protection feature. But if like this, all the VMs are down and you have a storage like this, yes, it will probably allow you to delete it.
Hey, Dito?
Yes.
Since when NFS was introduced in ESX?
NFS was introduced in the ESX from long back, even from ESX version 2.0. So I'm talking about almost 10 years. It was there all these years, but now people started using it in a little bit more in production environments. We used to use NFS. In our environments, we used NFS for storing ISO files and stuff like that from 2003 onwards. But nowadays, we we started using NFS for storing some development UAT class VMs also. So NFS is NFS, the protocol version also changed. It is improved. The drivers and associated protocols inside ESX server, ESXi server per se, is much more improved, and the performance also has improved. So it's very stable. Highly recommended to use. Small to mid-sized companies are using NFS for the protection also. Okay, move on. Networking. I will talk about this. I will come back and talk about networking. Before that, I wanted to cover, and that is the topic I'm going to start talking today. So we will come back about networking. This is what is networking. I'll talk later. Later means today itself. I will be talking about networking, and that is one important topic. Storage adapters, as I said, this is your servers. Storage adapters. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. So this is in this server. I have a smart array P400 controller, and this is that hard drive. Here I can see that the hard drive. Let me maximize this. You can see that this is a hard drive, and that is 410 GB in capacity, and that is the one we are using here for our storage. That is the 405 GB. This is that same drive. The physical. If you want to look at a physical level, this is what it is. That array, that is that storage, and this is the thing. So I will talk about these things later. Okay. And this is actually I think this is your VMHBA32. That is actually a default controller card that's available on every server. That has nothing to do. There is nothing. You can see that there is nothing here. And this one is actually your CD-ROM drive. This is basically your CD-ROM drive. And that also is a storage. Once you put CD, it is actually a media, right? So it is also represented in the same way as it is. So this is your CD, and this is your default. I think I don't know what VMHBA32 is typically a general purpose thing, which will come into play when we talk about ice cases. So don't worry about it. But when you come to the storage, you have to look at your array controller and look at your array. So if you have 3 logical volumes, you see all of them here, like here. If you go to the storage adapters and smart array, see, and you select that, you see all of them. If you come here, and you can see that that's the CD-ROM here. Okay. Then coming to network adapters, nothing can be done here. Here you can see all the physical network cards that are attached to your ESX server. It will show its speed, its configurations, what switch it is connected, MAC addresses, IP range, and things like that. This server, I only have 2 network cards. Now, guys, believe me, in a real production class environment, VMware environment, it is highly recommended to have at least 4 network cards. There are companies that are using 6 and 8 and 12 network cards if your hardware supports, but minimum 4 to 6 is recommended. You can do everything, virtualization, you can build VMs, you can configure ESX server, everything with just 1 network card, but that is not the right configuration. We will talk about some best practices, we'll talk about some network isolations and all when we get in. But some of my servers, I only have 2 network cards, some have more. If you look at this server, this is my old server, this has actually 6 network cards. If you click here, you can see that it has 6 network cards. How much ever, there are network cards that comes with dual port, quad port, so in this server, if you know this server, normally the servers come with 2 network cards on board, and then you can put additional network cards. When it comes to blade servers have something called as mezzanine cards. So you can buy quad port or things like that, and then they also have onboard NICs. If it's local, you need to have some downtime. What are you talking, Sridhar? I didn't understand your question. Local storage or network storage? To add additional storage, how do you plan to bring down the server if prod VMs are running? Okay, that all is different questions. A good question. How do you bring down? Bringing down a ESX server is the biggest challenge, because ESX server means only one server. If you bring that server down, okay. In old days, let's say you have a Windows server running Exchange 2003 or Exchange 2010 server. You have a hardware problem. You can bring down that server. You're only bringing down that Exchange server. But that's not the case when you talk about a hypervisor that supports many VMs, and those VMs are actually the main business things for your company. Your business units are depending on those servers. Many VMs are business critical servers. So if you bring down a ESX server just like that for the sake of changing a hard drive, you will lose your job for sure. But VMware has some great technologies. We will be learning those technologies. So gracefully, you can move your VMs from one server to another by using basically the vMotion technology. You can move the VMs from one ESX server to another ESX server, and you can bring down the problematic server down without any service interruption.
That means you need to have minimum 2 ESX.
You should have 2 or maybe more. 2 is, I won't say in a good environment, you should have a minimum 3. 2 is okay. Or 2,
right.
You can have 2. Yeah, well, your question agreed.
Right.
Minimum you should have 2. Yes. And
right.
2 also.
The question he pointed. The question he was pointing, I thought he was talking about one single ESX.
Yeah, so we will talk about that. We will be using the clustering at that point. You will see how we can do that. And so we do patching of ESX servers during business hours all the time. Patching of a ESX server means reboot of an ESX server is required. When you patch, typically you have to reboot the servers. But we do the patching all the time during business hours without impacting any single VM. So that is where the storage, shared storage come into picture. That is where the vMotion come into picture. That is where the proper networking come into picture. A whole lot of things. So that all come as part of the clustering, and we will learn clustering once we learn vCenter. That's a later part of the session, but good to have all these questions in mind, and we will come to those topics as we move on. Okay. There is nothing in this advanced setting, power management. It is another policy. There is nothing here. Now coming to the licensing feature here, if you look here, you can see that your ESX server evaluation copy has all these features. I won't be teaching everything, guys. Some of the topics are out of the scope of what I'm trying to teach. There are quite some things that are out, but 90%, or I would say around 85% of the things that are mentioned here, we will be learning, we will be touching. For example, up to 32, that's a general thing. You can use up to 32 processors on a VM. vCenter agent, we'll be talking vStorage APIs. That is a technology. It's nothing to learn about it. That is a technology available in ESX servers now with supporting SAN storage. If you have a latest SAN storage like VMAX or VNX and the newest Symmetrix SAN storage, you can use vStorage APIs to do something. There is actually a concept called VAAI, vStorage API for array integration. That's all little advanced topics, but those features will come as part of this. There is nothing to learn. VM safe is something I'm not going to talk about it. This is not being used. Again, in our environment also, we don't use VM safe. It's kind of a protection for some VMs. I don't think it's very important there, but it is there. So I won't be talking about that. VM's vSphere HA is the high availability. That is part of the clustering. We will be talking a lot about that particular thing. Hot pluggable virtual hardware is a feature. You can add memory and CPU to your VMs on the fly when the VMs are running. A server is running with 2 GB RAM and you want to add another RAM to it, you can add it on the way, hot pluggable. vMotion, we will be talking about. FT, I will be talking about. vSphere disaster data recovery, that's the backup part I will be talking about. vShield zones, probably I may not talk, but I will give an idea, but I don't think we will be trying that in the class. vSphere DRS, we'll talk a lot, we will do a lot about that. Storage vMotion, we will be talking about it. Multipathing, we will be talking, but I don't know, much we can do there, but we will be talking about it. Distributed switch, we will be talking. Host profiles, we will be talking. These are all comes into picture only when you have the vSphere, meaning we have the vCenter. Without vCenter, you're not going to get all these features. If you have only one ESX server or 2 ESX servers standalones, you cannot get any of these great features. If you want to get that real features, that options you get only when you have the vCenter. And that we will learn. But before that, we need to learn about storage, networking, and things like that. So see, this is that VAI thing I was talking about, vStorage API for array integration. That is for multiple cloning and things like that. This one is card reader. I don't know what that is. I never used that. Storage DRS, we will be talking. We will look into it. Profile-driven storage, we will be looking at it. Metro vMotion, we can talk about it, but I don't think we can do that because I don't have another office or anything. Auto deploy, I'm not going to talk. This is again for very large environments where you can deploy it automatically. Only for huge data centers like Amazon or Rackspace probably will be using that. So these are the different features, and depending on your licensing, you get all these features. So VMware licensing is another important factor. Okay, so this is another picture. VMware has different licensing. If you look here, you can see that VMware, guys, if you want to take a screenshot of this, okay. So this is the VMware different ESX server licenses. So ESX server licenses starts with standard. You get advanced, enterprise, and enterprise plus. If you look at it, you can see that just like a ladder, the features are going. If you have standard, you are going to get only these many features. And if you have enterprise plus, you're going to get all these features. See, I was talking about host profiles, distributed switch, storage I/O control, multipathing, DRS, DPM, storage vMotion, vShield, data recovery, all those things I showed you here. You get all these things only if you have enterprise plus. Distributed switch, that's another thing. If you want distributed switch, you have to have, see that distributed switch, you have to have enterprise plus. So if you are on evaluation mode for 60 days, you get all these features. So we take the advantage of that and we learn everything. But when you go to a company, depending on what license they have, that is all you get it. So if you are an ESX server and if you don't see the option to create host profiles, or if you don't see the option to create distributed switch, then probably your ESX server may not be licensed to do that. If they have a standard license or advanced license, you won't get all these features. So ESX servers, the features are all based on different licensing models. I say with the new cloud implementations and cloud kind of environment is now taking the front step, it is highly recommended to have enterprise plus licenses. In our office, I would say around 70% of our servers are running enterprise plus. Yesterday, day before, I gave a great presentation to a few of my top level management. These are based on some of my studies I did on my VMworld 2012. And I presented a new design for our vSphere 5, how we need to go vSphere 5.1, how do we need to implement, what are our next 3 years plans, and that I suggested upgrading all our servers to enterprise plus, because then only we can actually implement a local private cloud, and I think it will get approved. The management understand the need of it, and we are going towards it. There are certain other things which you need to look at it. If you have only enterprise plus, you can only have up to 6 physical cores. If you have enterprise plus, you can have 12 physical cores. If you have enterprise, you can have only up to 256 GB memory you can put on your server. Even though you are hardware, your HP server can support up to 1 terabyte memory, there is no use, it cannot see. It is just like the Windows Server Standard Edition and Windows Server Enterprise Edition. If you are familiar with Windows Server Standard and Enterprise in old days, I'm talking about 2003, let's take a 2003 Standard Edition Windows Server, it can only support up to 4 GB. If you want to support more than 4 GB, then you need to have the Microsoft Windows Server 2003 Enterprise Edition. There are some PAE mode and other boot in the boot file. You can make some changes. You can expand the memory and all, but that's out of the normal norm. But there are some ways to expand the memory on servers. But if you really want to install SQL Server, or if you want, again, another thing, Microsoft case. You want to install clustering. If you want to install clustering, Microsoft says you should have enterprise. Enterprise server is double the cost of a standard server. So every company makes money out of these kind of things. That is how they survive. Oh, you want I have this great feature called clustering. You can do Microsoft clustering. Okay, great. Okay, but you need to buy enterprise license. Oh, what is the license price? Oh, it's $10,000. How much for standard? $2,000. So that's how it is. Every company do their trap, and that is exactly VMware is also doing. You know, if you want that greatest and all these features, you have to buy these licenses. Time configuration. This is something I know we did as part of the installation itself. But on ESXi, you can actually come here. The time configuration. This is the NTP server settings. You can go here. There is actually the NTP server here. If you have an NTP server, in this case, we don't have. So I'm going to add my 10.10.10.2. That is my NTP server. I added. So NTP server is a network time protocol server that gets the time for your server. So this server will going forward is going to talk to this server for the time. If whatever the time on this server will be the time on my server. So every company will have an NTP server, which will be in turn talking to an external server. You know, for example, U.S. Army, your U.S. Air Force, and they all have some atomic clocks, and you know there are some external servers. Also, the major providers, Cisco and Comcast, they also have time servers. You can point it to any time server. There are other general purpose time servers available. So your server can be pointed to a time server. I think I don't know. I mean, I think yeah, time zones. It's not here actually. It's a registry setting on my Windows server. So again, that's a server, and then this NTP service is actually a service running on your server. So once you configure it, you have to restart that service. So you click on that. It will actually restart that service. You can actually start and stop all these services. You can do that here. It's actually now running, and that's why you are seeing that option. So now the NTP server is running. It is getting the time. It is collecting the time from that server. Yes, every ESX server requires a license, but it does not mean that you have to buy license for individual. You can buy license in huge package. So when we buy license, we buy 20 sockets or 100 sockets. We buy 100 sockets and we keep it in our central repository, which is nothing but the vCenter server. When I add a server with 2 sockets, automatically that server will license from the pool. So now I will have only 98. When I add my next server, it will take another 2. Now I will only have 96. So when I reach a certain limit, I can configure my license server to send me an alert. So I get an alert that it's time for me to buy a new set of license. So I can go and buy another set of license. If you have only one server, you can buy one license. That is why I say, you don't have to install a license when you build a ESX server. Your license will automatically add it to that server when you add that server to the vCenter for a more global management. If you have only one ESX server standalone in your house for your own purpose, then you need to have a standalone license. Okay. VMware licenses is part of, it was actually a third-party software all these years, FlexLM licensing. FlexLM and all were part of old versions. That is all gone. With ESX4 onwards, the VMware vCenter server itself is a license server. When we learn vCenter server, we will learn the licensing. So vCenter server controls the license. So that is where the licenses are stored. So we will learn when we get into vCenter. So that is the licensing, DNS and routing. Again, I'm just quickly going here, guys. So this is the DNS information. As you know, you can here is where you can change the name. You can actually edit these properties of your server. Here, if you want, you can change the name, the domain name, the DNS servers, and all this information you can actually put here. The routing is actually, that's a gateway information. So whatever you put the IP information, that is here, not the IP address. This is the DNS server information. So you can put all that information here, and this will give you the details. Authentication service. You can now with ESX file, you can add your ESX server to the Active Directory domain and make it part of your Active Directory. So you can use your NT accounts or your Active Directory accounts to log into ESX server. So ESX servers are now integrated with your Active Directory domain. I am not doing that here, but we can do that. So it is right now it's using local authentication, but you can go to the properties here and you can select Active Directory, and you can specify abc.com and actually join that domain. So you can actually add, but to join that domain, you have to give the domain administrator privileges or the credentials here to add that server. It's not a great thing. I mean, it's not a big thing to do, but definitely I strongly recommend to add your ESX servers as part of your Active Directory so that it will have more inventory, and you can, it's for many other inventory purpose. I think it will be good, not only for inventory purpose, it will also help you to track who is actually using. So you don't need to create any local user accounts. You can permission people from Active Directory, and then people can log into any to ESX servers using their NT credentials. Okay. Moving on, virtual machine startup shutdown. There is basically, you can. This I will talk later. There is nothing much here. When you start VMs, you can actually when you start a VMs, you can say how much delay and all. I will talk about these things later. It is by default whatever is the setting, that is the I will sorry, I will try to do that. I have to get it from office. Okay. So this I will talk about these things later time. Okay. These information. Virtual machine swap file location. So what is a swap file? I will talk about it later. Again, I cannot, because you don't know what that swap file is, but by default, virtual machine swap files are stored in the virtual machine directory. But if you want, you can set it up on a ESX server. You can say, okay, in this ESX server, all the VMs in this ESX server, let them store their swap file in a particular location. Swap file is called as the virtual memory of your VM. So you all know what a virtual memory is, right? Page file or virtual memory or swap file, they're all same meaning. So it's actually a temporary memory. When your memory is full and there is no more space, the operating system can page out. Paging, that's a process. It can page out some part of the memory contents that are not active. Those unused memory can be moved to a storage, to a hard disk in a temporary location, which is called as a page file or a swap file. So every virtual machine will also have a swap file which will be equal to the size of its memory. We will talk about that when we get onto the memory. So that swap size, that swap memory size will be equal to the size of your VM's memory. But where do you want to store that swap file? That is the question. Typically, it will be stored along with the memory. If you remember, when I was showing you the files of a VM, there are many files, right? VMX file, VMDK file, and there was a file called VWSP file, VSwap file. That is called the swap file. That file is what I'm talking about. We will go there. At that point, I will explain this more again. But understand, a swap file is nothing but a page file or a virtual memory of your VM. Security profile. A VMware ESX server has a built-in firewall, a very powerful firewall. So many things are firewall. It will only allow certain things to be connected. It will allow only certain ports to be opened. By default. Whatever is required, that is only open. So at this point, if you look here, you can see that this server has so many ports are opened for different purposes. You can see that. So if you go to the properties here, you can see that first of all there are certain services. These are not ports. I'm not talking about firewall here. I'm talking about some services. These are the different services that are running on this server. And you can see that these are all part of, I don't know what this is, but there are certain things. For example, ESXi shell, SSH. You can actually do SSH to an ESXi server. We will talk about this. We will use that SSHI. You can use PuTTY or any other SSH clients to connect to an ESXi server, and you can do some management of it. If you are especially familiar with the Linux, you can do quite a lot of things with that SSH shell and connect. So these are all different servers. This is the direct console UI. If you don't want anybody to access that ILO screen, and change anything from that ILO screen, you can actually stop this service. There is actually an option to do that, disable the direct console user interface. So if you disable that, then even if you get access to the ILO and you see the actual screen of your ESX server, you cannot do anything. You can block it from here. In a highly secured environment, I recommend to do that, but in typical environments, people don't disable that, because whenever you need to troubleshoot, you need to get access to that. So these are different services. As we add more services, you can see that the services will come in there. Coming to the properties, firewall properties, you can see that these are all the different firewalls and the different ports that are available. These are all the different ports. For example, if you want to add a ISCSI protocol for connecting to an ISCSI storage, you have to actually enable the ISCSI port. You see that? ISCSI port. If you want to use NFS, you have to enable the NFS port. Otherwise, the port is default, is disabled. You want to use FTP. You can use FTP with your ESX server, but it is a security threat. By default, it is disabled. If you want, you can enable that. So only certain services are actually allowed on the ESX server. That is what it is currently running. These are the services and the ports that are currently running. If you access the DC UI, how do you access? Good question. If you access it, then you have to access it through this way. This is the only interface for it. You cannot access the direct console. That is actually used in a case. For example, Aravind, let us say I have a satellite office in Dallas, a small office in Dallas, where we have a small closet where we have one ESX server or two ESX servers running some small infrastructure servers. There is no VMware guys there. There is nobody responsible for IT infrastructure is there, and I don't want to leave my server open there. So in that kind of a case, I use DC UI to be disabled. I don't want anybody to touch that server. Even if a networking guy or a guy who work on something come in there, I don't want him to access the server. And that is the case where you want to disable the DC UI. If your servers are in your own data center and you have access to it, there is no need for you to do that. Okay. I think that's it. Guys. Generally, host cache information. It is actually, I don't know. This is a new. I think there's a SSD feature. I don't know what this is. I think this is new part of the new ESX i5. Let me make a note of that. I don't know what this is actually. I think that is with the new servers that are coming up with SSDs, you can configure that, but host cache configuration, I think that's for the caching SSD. I will take a look at it and talk to you tomorrow. I don't know. That's a new feature that comes with the ESX i5. I'm not sure about what that is. It's nothing. System resource allocation. You can actually edit these settings, and you can actually change certain properties. For example, I told you our ESX server kernel will reserve some memory. So you can see that 240 megahertz is reserved for your system, and 500 MB of memory is reserved for your kernel. No matter what, this much amount of memory is reserved. So this resource allocation is all part of something called as resource pools, and we will learn this in detail when we get into resource pools and configuration. At that point, you will understand what is this, what is limit, what is reservation, what a share is. There are different shares, and there are different values you can give it to it. So I will talk about this in detail when we get into cluster, and when we get into cluster, there is a topic called resource pools, which is very important. Resource pools are the way to manage your memory and CPU resources in a cluster. So if I have a HR department, instead of giving them 5 servers, I can give the HR department, okay, you guys take 2 gigahertz of processing power and 100 GB memory. I will give you 2 gigahertz and 100 GB memory. You do with it whatever. You can configure 20 server or 50 server, I don't care, but all your servers are going to use only that much amount of memory. So I can create resource pools with reservations and give it to companies and charge them back for their usage. So when it comes, all these, this is going towards chargeback policies. So when departments come, I don't charge you for a VM. See, okay, one VM is $200. Can I say that? I don't think I can, because Sri will come and ask me, Deepu, I need a VM, but I need 4 processors and 24 GB RAM. Gene will come and say, Deepu, I need a VM with 2 GB RAM and 1 CPU. Can I charge both of them with the same price? No. So in a virtualized environment, if you want to do charge back, you should not charge back based on a VM. You should never say that, okay, one VM is this much money. No, rather you charge them based on what they use. That is called chargeback. There are other tools that are available in the market for chargeback and billing policies. It depends on your company needs. Some companies internally within the organization itself, they do chargebacks. They charge finance, they charge accounting, they charge other department, human resource, and things like that. Some companies, they don't do that. They have one IT infrastructure and they will take all the pay. They will pay for it. Every department wants something, we will give it. So in that case, you don't need chargeback. But when you charge back, and like in our case, we charge back in different companies, different departments, even though it's all part of one company, we charge back. It is internal chargebacks. At that kind of stage, you need this kind of reservation and you charge based on that. Okay? We will be learning all these things in detail. This is just showing you this. When we get into vCenter, then only you get the real picture of it. So don't worry about it. I'm only showing you some a tip of an iceberg here. We have a lot more things to explore when we get into the vCenter and the vSphere. That is what the vSphere platform is. You know that vSphere platform, ESX is just a component of it. vCenter is the brain. vCenter is the management brain for all these things. So once we get on to vCenter, once we learn vCenter, that is where you're going to see all these great features. Actually, all these features are there on the hypervisor. You can take use of it only once you have the vCenter. Okay. Agent VM settings. I don't know. It's actually the agent settings. I don't think these are very important things. These are some advanced settings. I think I don't need to talk about this now. I mean, I will talk, but these are very advanced settings. I strongly recommend you to touch this area only if you are working with a support engineer. Even I don't do that here. I do, if you do some, if you go to VMware, some knowledge articles and all, if you have a problem, you can do that. For example, by default, if you go to if you go to this one, you can see that here the maximum size in MB, which not this one. Okay, see here, disk max LUT. I'm giving an example here. By default, an ESX server can only see up to 256 LUNs. 256 LUNs is a huge amount, okay. Typically in our office and all, we have a LUN size of 500 GB and sometimes 1 terabyte. If you are talking about 256 500 GB LUNs, means you are talking about 2 petabytes of storage, guys. Huge amount of storage. But let us say there is, for some reason, you want to add more than 256 LUNs. In that case, you have to come to this advanced thing and change that. So those kind of things, for example, again here, the read write, how much read you can do that. I was looking at here somewhere, there was an option that I know what is the maximum outstanding commands to a target with competing words. How many you can do that if you want to increase. So there are many settings like that for memory and for every detailed configuration of ESX server other than the normal norm. If you want to make some changes, you can actually do that. See, maximum size in MB, which the VMware heap is allowed to grow. That's actually, so it's actually basically, it is actually 80. You want to make, so VMFS max heap size MB. I really don't know what that is, but I can easily find out. Just copy that thing, put it in Google, you get answer for it. So if you want to make that, follow VMware's recommendations. If they have recommendation, means don't just go by somebody in a blog. I don't recommend that. Go to VMware's KB articles. Just like Microsoft KB articles, VMware has a whole lot of KB articles. You know, so that is actually kb.vmware.com. I think that's the site actually. You can go there and you can see hundreds of KB articles, thousands of KB articles. You know, VMware has a huge amount of information in their site. If you're really interested, you can get every document, you can get every information from here. So type in your KB number, you know, things like that, and you can actually get the KB number, and then you read about it, look into that, you know, you will be able to see. For example, Windows 18, so these are all KB articles. This is actually a Microsoft VMware's KB article look like. Windows operating system does not boot or install on ESXi. So there may be some workarounds. This is probably on ESXi. They are saying Windows Server 2012 will not be supported on ESXi 4 or 4.1. It is only supported from 5.1 onwards. They are saying it is supported on 5.1 with update 1. So if you want to make some changes, they may be saying, okay, you can do like that. You know, this is the KB article. So follow VMware's official KB articles if you want to do things like that. Okay. So follow that. Don't ever go to these advanced settings and make changes the way you want it. Your server may not come back. It is something very similar to you making changes to a Windows server's registry. If you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what the impact is. So be very careful when changing advanced settings. So I would say strongly follow VMware's recommendation. Even with the VMware thing, you know, I normally work with VMware support engineers and take their recommendation, and we normally make those changes only with the help of the support engineer. I normally don't do the changes by myself because we don't know the impacts of that. All right, so that is what the general thing. What I wanted to talk about is, it's only things for 5 o'clock, guys. I wanted to talk networking. Let me ask you here, anybody has any objection if I continue one more hour? If anybody has objection, please talk. There's no problem. Okay, I'm not holding it. Anybody has any objection? I would like to take up to 6 o'clock if possible, so that I can do probably a good part of networking, a good section of networking, so that you guys can practice tomorrow. And there is no class tomorrow.
Can we take a break?
Yeah, we'll take a break. We will take a 10 minutes break. I also want to take a tea. Let us regroup around 5:05 EST. If anybody has any objection, let me know. Don't worry about others. If you have a problem, you have something planned, please tell me. I don't have a problem. I'll be on the GoToMeeting phone. That's fine. Okay. So everybody is saying to continue. So guys, we will continue. Let us do another 1 more hour. We'll talk about networking. So Sridhar, there is no way you can charge your laptop? Arvind, Sujan, Sri, Shamrat. Guys, please tell if you're there, okay? Those who are not responded, please type your presence there. Satya, okay? Shri, Arvind, Sujan. Okay, two more. Satya, Arvind, and Samrat. Arvind. Shri. Sridhar, you there? Yeah, I can not see Sridhar. Sridhar actually logged out, it seems. What about Arvind? Yeah, Arvind, are you there? All right, guys, so I'm going to start, okay? So, and I don't want to teach that without everybody because this is an important topic. That's a problem. Okay, good. Arvind is there. So, Sridhar, he had a problem, I think he will be either on the phone or maybe he will connect back. So, I'm going to start here, guys. So, networking is an important topic in the VMware server. Okay, so please record for that and give it to him. Okay, Arvind, thanks. Okay. So, a lot of people say, Deepu, you have recording, but the thing is, you can see that, I just follow based on the class. You are asking questions, I have answer, maybe I'll get into that. So, there is no definite class number 5, Deepu is teaching that, class number 6. Based on the mood, based on the time, many aspects, I select the topic and I move forward, but I'll cover everything, but it will be on different classes, different sessions, things like that. See, the way I'm teach you so far is totally different from the way I taught the last batch. Last batch I did spend some other time in other topics. In fact, I went to some other topics. I'm just saying, so it's different. Anyway, so networking is one of the most important topic in VMware. If you don't understand networking, it will be very difficult for you to understand the topics that are coming in future. Many things we're going to learn are dependent on the network. Many things. So I would say the most important topic, one of the most, will be network. So you should have a very clear understanding. I recommend you to read about it and try to practice also a lot. So this is actually the networking tab in the configuration networking tab. You can see this networking tab and you can see a switch here. This is actually a virtual switch. I'm not going to talk a lot about it today. We will do this on the next class. But I just want to give you an overall idea about what a switch is and things like that. When it comes to a switch, you can come here and you can click properties. You can see the properties of a switch. If you want, you can create additional switches. You can create up to, I think, up to 516 switches. I don't know the final numbers. Again, you can read about it. I don't think there is any need to create that many switches. Switching networking is actually divided into two sections in VMware. There is a standard switch. That is what this is. This is called as a standard switch. This was the switch technology that was available with VMware ESX servers all through these years up to ESX server version 4, which was in 2008. In 2008, VMware introduced a different type of a switch called as distributed switch, which was not used widely, but now that has become the front end, and that is a lot of people using that, and that is something we learn later. Distributed switch is something you can learn, or you will be available only when you have a virtual center. So a distributed switch is a different topic, but it is very similar to a standard switch, but the configuration and the deployment of a distributed switch is totally different from a standard switch. Don't worry about that. We're going to focus on standard switch, which is kind of one of the most important switching technology. It is still being used widely, and this is the number one switching thing you need to understand. So this is actually a switch. As just a few things I just want to talk about it. You can see a switch here. This is actually a switch, again, like the processors, like the hard disk. You know, the number of a switch starts from 0. This is the first switch in your server. That is vSwitch 0. Who created this switch? The installation of your server automatically creates this switch. You don't have to do anything. This switch was created by default as part of your installation. This switch is a standard switch. The name of the switch is vSwitch 0. This switch has this is a virtual switch. This switch is connected to a physical network card of your ESX server. If you go to the network adapters, you can see that there are two network cards, VMNIC 0 and VMNIC 1. These are the two onboard network cards available on your HP DL385 G2 server. And one of this is actually now connected to our switch. This is a virtual switch. So this virtual switch is attached to a physical switch, which is actually a VMNIC 0. This virtual switch has some blocks. You can look, if you look carefully, you can see that this is one block that is called as virtual machine port group. I'll explain what is that. Virtual machine port group. That is a port group, or is a grouping technology where you can put all your virtual machines. There are 5 virtual machines in that virtual machine port group, and those are these 5 virtual machines. All these virtual machines are connected to this port group, and they are attached to this switch, and they can talk to the outside world using this physical network card. Every VM will have its own network card. If you go to a VM and go to the edit settings of the VM, and you can see that there is a network adapter. This is a virtual network card of your VM. This virtual network card, you can see that there is, it says it is on a VM network port group. This is actually the name of your port group, VM network. If you look here, you can see that VM network, that is the name of that port group. I will go to the properties of this switch, and I will show you VM network. See, that is the property of that switch. This is that port group. I will explain what that port group is and all, but this is the port group. So all these VMs are now connected to this port group called as VM network, and that is a virtual machine port group. There is another type of a port group which is called as VM kernel port group. This VM kernel port group is a special type of a port group that is used by the VM kernel for its communication. VM kernel port is never used by a VM. You cannot put a VM inside a VM kernel port group. VMs always reside in a virtual machine port group. So there are 2 types of port groups we're going to learn here. There was a third type of port group called a service console port group that was with part of the ESX server. I'm not going to talk about it, but I'm just saying, if somebody asks you, there was a service console port group was there in ESX4. But here in an ESXi, we only have 2 port groups because we don't have service console. You can create a new switch by clicking on this Add Networking tab here. So when you click on that Add Networking, you can see that you can take, it's called the port groups are also called as connection types. So there are two types of connection types, a virtual machine port group or a virtual machine connect type, or you can create a VM kernel port group. So there are two types of port groups. Again, very, very important point. Okay, these are all very important point. When you talk about interview, when you go for interviews, okay, let me mute Sridhar. I know Sridhar joined. Let me mute him first. Okay. So that's fine. So I muted him. Sridhar, I muted you. If you can hear me, you can see me. That's well. You can type. There is a lot of noise coming from your side, so I muted you. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so I hope you can hear me good. So there are two types of port groups in a VMware ESXi server, which is called as virtual machine port group, something like this, and a VM kernel port group, that is something like this. So port groups are also called as connection type. Very, very important point. So you can create a switch with a virtual machine port group, or you can create a port group with a VM kernel port group. Fanny, that's not correct. VLANs are totally different topics. We will talk about it. VLANs are virtual LANs. I will talk about that. That is something that requires a lot more talking. Probably I will talk in the next class. So VLANs are very, very important topic when it comes to here. Port groups are not VLANs. Port groups are a type of connection. That's it. So virtual machine port groups and VM kernel port group. So I'm going to create a new switch here. This switch was created by default as part of the installation. It create one switch, and that switch has two types of port groups or two types of connection types. One is a virtual machine connection and a VM kernel port group connection. So there are two types here. These both were created by default when you build an ESX server. But you can create your own switches. For example, I'll show you how to create a new switch. I'm going to create a switch with a virtual machine port group. Click next. So it is asking create a vSphere standard switch, and it is seeing that there are two network cards available. So look at the picture that is forming at the bottom. It has selected my second network card. First network card is not available because it is already attached to the first switch. That is vSwitch 0. There is one network card available, so by default it selected that. You can create a switch without a uplink, or this is also called as an uplink. A connection to a physical network card of your ESX server is also called as an uplink. I will talk about that again in detail, but this is called as an uplink. So I can create a switch without an uplink or with an uplink. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new switch. See, this is the switch. It's a virtual machine port group switch, and it is attached to VMNIC 1. Currently the name is VM Network 2 because already there is a VM network. You click next, you can change that name. I can call it as a development servers network. I can give any name or it. And then there is a VLAN thing, VLAN IDs. I will talk about VLANs and all in a later topic, but just leave it 0. If it is VLAN ID is 0, means it can communicate to any traffic. There is no VLAN and it can talk to anywhere. So you can just leave that like that for now. When you create, if you change any values like 2 or something, it is going to create problems. So click next, and this is your switch, and finish. Here you go. I created a second switch. The name of the switch we created now is called as vSwitch 1. It has one port group, which is called as Development Server Network. That's the name of the port group. It is a virtual machine port group. It has one uplink, which is actually VMNIC 1. The speed of that NIC is 100 full. I can remove that switch just by doing that. It will be removed. And any action I'm doing here is actually logged here in the events. You can see that remove switch, update switch. If you go to the events tab, you can see all the operations Deepu has done here. It will show you all this information. We will get more details of it when we have vCenter, but you can see the details here. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to create the switch again. I can create one more virtual machine port group switch here. I'm using that. We call it as dev network. Finish. So I created my new switch here. If you want, you can create another switch here. Again, another virtual machine port group switch here. Next, there is no more NIC cards used, but I'm going to create a network card without an uplink. Let me call it as a isolated network. I'm just creating. There are purposes for it. We will talk about those things when it comes to a real life environment. So I created another switch, that is vSwitch2. So now I have 3 switches here. The switch 2, vSwitch2 has again a virtual machine port group type. There is no uplinks to it. That means if you have a VM here, it cannot talk to the outside world. Is the same as creating virtual switches using HP NCU. Fanny, I don't know what is HP NCU. What do you mean by that? I don't know. Is it a feature inside a Hyper-V?
So it's actually on blades and physical servers. On the HP NIC adapter, you can actually right click on the HP NIC adapter and go to its properties. It's HP NCU properties.
Oh, got it. Got it. You're talking about HP NIC teaming, right?
Yeah. Usually we use it for teaming, and we can also in there if we add a VLAN, it will create a virtual NIC.
Okay, this is not that. This is totally different. NIC teaming and all is it is for redundancy purpose. You can club 2 or 3 NIC cards together so that they can act as one single pipe. There is teaming here. There is teaming inside ESX server. If you go to the properties of a switch, you can see that there are NIC teaming and there are many properties to it. But this is nothing to do with teaming. Is different. This is something you're creating a virtual switch. I don't think using HP you are creating any switch there. By HP you are teaming, you are creating a virtual network card, which is a combination of multiple network cards. Correct? You are not creating any switch there. You are creating a virtual NIC there by clubbing multiple NICs together. Is that correct, Fanny?
Yeah.
Okay. So let us not bring that topic here. I know you have questions, but that's fine. But keep asking those questions. But that is totally outside the scope of this. It is something that is not being talked at all here because it's a HP or Dell's proprietary technique that to allow redundancy. So let us not talk about it. 100-fold. The question from Aravind. 100-fold. That is the speed of your network card. So this is actually I know why it is. All my servers which you guys are going to work, they are all going to have a 1,000 full connection. It is a gigabit connection. All my network cards are actually connected to a gigabit switch, but I do have an old 100 Mbps switch. So that is the speed of the NIC. This is my infrastructure server. This server is not used in the lab, or I will not give you guys to do because my vCenter is actually here, or you know there is some other reasons why I cannot give this server. So I put it on 100-fold, which is more than enough. So 100-fold is actually the speed of your network card. Actually, you can go to the properties of your network card and change the properties. So you can actually go to the networking, go to the properties here, and go to the network adapter here. And actually, if you click here, you can see you can change the speed to 10 Mbps, 10 MB full duplex, half duplex, 100 MB and 1000 MB duplex. These are different speeds, but it's always recommended to keep it auto negotiate so that you will not have problem. If you are not sure about what speed and all, always keep it with the default. ESX server by default detects what the setting is and it will work. If you change this setting, there is a very good chance that you will lose the connection to the server. Just imagine this is your server, ESX server, and you manage this ESX server using this management network, which is actually a VM kernel port. You manage it using this network card. If you disconnect this network card, what happens? You will not be able to connect to the server, correct? You will lose connection to that server. To fix that, what do you have to do? Anybody? You have to go through the ILO, connect using the direct console user interface, get into the properties of networking and try to fix it there. That's the only way you can fix it. In ESXi, it's much more easier. If it was in the old days with ESX server, you have to know a lot of Linux commands. You have to get into Linux, and it was a pain to do that. those who are experienced with Linux, it would have been easy. But if you are not familiar with Linux commands and all, it was very difficult those days. But now it's much more easier. We will talk about that. I will show you. But remember, this is your connection to the outside world. You are seeing this server, or I am managing this server. Everything is happening through this connection. So these are my server. Let me put this picture in a paintbrush here to show you what exactly happened. So let us just see. You have to understand this. So this is, let us say, this is my desktop here. Okay, I am sitting on my desktop. I have a switch here in my environment. This switch has many ports. This is a let us say this is a 100 GB switch. So I have a connection from this computer to one of the ports. I also have this so-called 10.10.10.200 ESX server here. This is that ESX server. This ESX server has many VMs running on it. This ESX server has two network cards, which we talked about, VMNIC0 and VMNIC1. Both these network cards are connected to this switch. This is NIC0 and this is NIC1. Let us just imagine that. So this is how it is. Now I am talking to this ESX server. Tell me which NIC card I am using to talk to this ESX server. I am using the NIC0 because my management interface or management network is connected to this VMNIC0. If you disconnect this VMNIC0, will you be able to talk? So you are disconnecting this NIC card. Now can I talk from here? I cannot. So be very careful with that. So you can do that provided if you add additional network card. You can actually add additional network cards to your your server. I will show you that in a minute. Okay. So these are different network cards. This is how you create NICs and all those things. So we will talk a lot about this in coming days. In the next probably 1 or 2 days, we will be talking only about networking. But I'm just trying to give you an overall idea about what a switch is and things like that. So now that I have, now I'm going to ask some questions. Okay, I want answers here. How many switches I have here?
Only.
Okay. There are 3 switches. That is correct. There are 3 switches. What are the names of that switches? Can anybody talk, please? If you can, please talk. One is empty. What do you mean by empty? There is no uplinks to it, but that is a switch. That is switch vSwitch 2.
There are 3 plus 1. What is kernel 1? Rest of the 2 are VM network and development network and isolated network.
Who is this?
This is Satya.
Okay. So there are 3 switches there, and the name of the switches are vSwitch 0, vSwitch 1, and vSwitch 2. I'm telling that vSwitch 0 has 2 port groups or 2 connection types. One is a virtual machine port group and one is a VM kernel port group. vSwitch 1 only has 1 port group, which is only a virtual machine port group. vSwitch 2 also has only 1 port group, which is actually an isolated network. vSwitch 2 does not have any uplinks. That means it is not having any connection to the outside world. vSwitch 1 is having connection to outside world. That is, it is connected to NIC1 and all. I'm just talking some properties. Just listen to that. That's all. You don't need to worry about it. We will be coming back to this in detail. I can actually create a VM kernel port group inside this switch if I want to. So what I have to do is go to the properties of this switch, click on add, select VM kernel port group, click next. You can call it as you can call it as VM kernel 2 or 1 or something like that. You can name it any name, but you can let us put it as VM kernel -1. Don't select all these options. We will talk about all these options. That is all required for vMotion and all. We will learn later. So you can see the picture is forming here. Click next. When you create a VM kernel port group, you have to specify certain IP addresses. I will talk about that also later, but for just for the namesake, I'm going to give it an IP address. I can use 70. So I'm going to give 10.10.10.70. I'm finished. Okay. Now look here. I have the second switch. I have two port groups now. One is a virtual machine port group and the second one is a VM kernel port group. But remember, this second port group is not can be used, even though it has an IP address, you cannot use it for management because it is not a management network. If I want to use this as a management network, I have to go to this and actually click on the edit button, and then I have to check this thing, management traffic. That way I can use that as a second option to manage. So now let me show you something here. I'm enabling that. Now I made that as a management port. Okay, everybody is agreed? I made this VM kernel port also a management port by enabling that feature called management traffic. Now, how many connections I have to this ESX server to manage?
2.
Okay. There are two connections, right? One is through which switch? What are the things? Can anybody talk a little bit more about it? Two, you said two. And they belongs to two different switches, right? One is through vSwitch 0 and one is through vSwitch 1. One management interface has an IP address of 202 and the other one is having an IP address of 70. So in this case, even if I lose this NIC or the whole thing, can I still manage this server? I can, correct? So let us see I can connect to that server using a vSphere client. So I'm going to go to vSphere client. And here I'm going to give the new IP address here, 10.10.10.70 root and password. I will be connecting to the same server. If you have a doubt, you can see that now. Listen. See, I'm connecting through 70. Here I connected through what? 202. So now look here. Here we go. I connected. Is it the same server or a different server? It is actually, guys, the same server, but I have two management interfaces. I'm going to expand this. You see all the VMs. I'm going to the configuration and I'm going to the networking. You can see the same exact networks. It is apple to apple. If you look at it, you can see that they both are exactly same servers. Because I have now two management interface. This is a good thing, right? If you lose this one NIC, you can connect through this NIC and manage your server. I mean, these are some advanced things. I just wanted to, if two people try to manage at the same time, there is nothing, you both can do. If as long as you both are not doing the same thing, there is no problem. If you are creating a VM and somebody else is creating something else, there is no problem. But if you both try to modify a same switch, you may have problems. But this is not highly recommended, but there are some cases where we do that for high availability. So you don't need to do this as such. I'm going to disconnect that connection and I'm going to delete this particular VM kernel port group itself completely. I don't need that actually, so I'm just deleting that port group. So now you cannot manage. Now if you go to the 70, you cannot even ping 70 because you deleted that management network. But let us say I'm going to remove this switch also here for a minute. Okay. So now I removed that switch. I'm removing this switch also for now. So that was one way of providing redundancy, but I can do another way of providing redundancy if you are worried about this physical network card. I can go to the properties of that switch, go to network adapters, this is the second tab, add, and add that second NIC card to here and finish. Now you see I have two network cards attached to this switch. So even though I disconnect this connection, I can still manage the server using the second one, right? So this is how you can provide redundancy. So this is what the recommended way of doing it. We will get into the details of it. There is a lot to talk about that, how you configure the properties of those two NICs and how you want to transfer the traffic and things like that. Now you imagine there are two NICs here, right? There are two network cards here, right? And what all things can anybody tell me? Let me try to understand how much you understand. What all uses these two NICs? Can anybody tell me? Who all uses that two network cards? Okay, management port. Okay, that's a much more better thing. Okay, vSwitch 0. Okay. Okay. Okay, vSwitch 0 is the correct. vSwitch uses both that NICs. But let us get a little bit deeper into it. 5 VMs and management port in vSwitch. Okay, public IP, local IP. Okay, more answers are coming. Good. All VMs and the VM kernel management network. That is the correct answer. All these VMs and the management network uses these two NICs. At this point, I don't know whether this VM is using NIC 1 or NIC 2. Now they are powered off, but let us say they are all working and people are connecting. Let's say these are all web servers. Hundreds of people are connecting from different parts of the world. These are my Merrill Lynch web servers. And hundreds of people are connecting. At the same time, Deepu is managing the ESX server. He is using this IP address and he is managing also. So we don't know whether Deepu is using this network card or this network card or VM is using. So there is a lot of confusion here. So we can actually dedicate certain traffic. You can actually route the traffic. All those things we will learn when we get into the properties of these switches and the policies, when we get into all these traffic shaping and all, which we will learn later. So you don't need to worry about it, don't bother about it, but I'm telling you can do like that. So this is a switch. I'm just going back to here and I'm going back to the network adapters and I'm going to remove that switch which I added. Again, remember, if there is two NICs, you are okay to remove one as long as they both are working. But if there is only one NIC and if you go here to the properties and if you remove this switch, you can only click remove. Then you will not be able to do anything here. What happens? Because you lost the connection. The command will be issued and as soon as it removes, then you will lose access to it. So be very careful. If you have only one NIC, never ever change that, delete that NIC. So I'm going to create one more NIC here, guys, just to show you something here. Let us call it as a VM network 2. So now I created another switch with a virtual machine port group called as VM network 2, and it is attached to a physical network card called VMNIC 1 or an uplink called VMNIC 1. So I have now two switches. And how many virtual machine port groups I have here?
Two only.
Okay, I have two virtual machine port groups. Aravind is saying 3. Aravind, what basis you said 3? How many VM
okay, in a switch one, you have two port groups.
Now there are 3 port groups here actually. There are total 3 port groups are there, but my question was how many virtual machine port groups are there? I told you virtual machine port groups are the only one that can be used with these VMs. Right now all these VMs are part of this VM network port group. There is no VMs in this network. You can actually put, how can you move this server or vSender 5 or this server to this port group? To do that, you have to go to a VM, right click on the VM, go to edit settings. You don't need to right click always. You can select that VM and you can edit from here also. Now if you click on the VM's network, currently can you tell me which port group it is? By looking here itself, you should be knowing which port group is this VM currently. It is on VM network port group, correct? You click on that, you will get a drop down here, and now you can see your network second port group. See that? All virtual machine port groups will be listed here. So I'm selecting virtual machine network 2 and I'm clicking OK. Now I say this VM is now part of this port group. See that? I can move the second machine also if I want to. I can change that machine also to that port group. Now I have 2 VMs on this port group and 3 VMs on this port group. Can you change the VM kernel also to the second NIC? You cannot change the VM kernel like that to the second NIC. You cannot. That's a good question. You cannot do that. You can create a second VM kernel port group here, but you cannot change the VM kernel to this port group. So if you go to the VM kernel port group here, you cannot change that to another network card. That is not possible. You have to create another one here. That is a management port group. You can create another VM kernel port group, and then you can delete this port group also if you want. Then you can keep the second one. That's the only option. Okay, Fanny? So like 70 you created, you can create and go ahead. Did anybody ask anything? Okay, Sridhar, I have to continue to mute you, man, because there's a lot of sound coming from your side, so I'm keeping you muted, okay? I just tried to unlock and it is a lot of stuff. It looks like you are in a playground or somewhere. That's fine. Okay, so that is a general overview of a switch, guys. That is a general overview of a switch. So now let me come back. We talked about it. I know the time is running, but I need to finish this in quickly a few more minutes. So I'm going to go to the networking document here. I have a networking concepts doc here. So now that you guys know much more than what you were a few days back, you now know what a kernel is and all. So this is actually, this picture I showed you earlier, and I also gave you an understanding of what they, so you know that this is actually your physical hardware. And this is a document that was created based on ESX server. So you will see a service console port group. I'm not going to talk about it, but this is same as the VM kernel port group also. So this is the VM kernel, correct? This is the VM kernel. You installed it on your server, and now you are talking about networking. We're going to talk about networking. So here is the thing. You have your uplink. These are your physical network card. In this particular server, there are 4 physical network cards, VMNIC 0 to VMNIC 3. And they are connected to a physical switch, physical network cards and physical NICs. Now you have your VMs with your virtual network card. You know that we talked about it. I explained this. You want your VMs to talk to outside world, or you want your VMs to talk between each other. You have to have what? You need to create a virtual switch. So here is the virtual switch you created. Do you know how to create a virtual switch? And when you create a virtual switch, you cannot create a switch without anything. You have to create a switch with a port group. At least one port group. It is a must. So you can create a VM kernel port group, or you can create a virtual machine port group, or you can create multiple port groups also. See, remember, I can show you something here. I come in here, I can add one more virtual machine port group here called virtual machine 3 here. Look at this now. Now this particular switch has 2 virtual machine port groups. You can create multiple virtual machine port groups here. That is where the VLANs come in. I will talk about it. When you have VLANs and all, you need multiple port groups. So now I can come to the workstation 3 and say, oh, you know what? You be part of. Now, how many I will see in this drop down? Can anybody tell me? How many I will see in the drop down? You will see 3 actually, because you have 3 virtual machine port groups. You have 1 here and 2 here. There are, see, this switch has 2 virtual machine port groups. This switch has 2 port groups. One is a virtual machine port group, and another one is a virtual machine. So you can have any combination. You can have multiple VM kernel port groups on a switch. You can have multiple virtual machine port groups in a switch. You can have any combination. It doesn't matter. So here is a switch that has 3 port groups. I told you the service console port groups is a concept in the ESX server. That is a special type of a port group, very similar to VM kernel port group. In an ESX server, the management interface is actually your service console. So the service console uses a service console port group. So if you have an ESX server, I'm not talking here, you can definitely go and see when you install an ESX server, you will be seeing by default a service console port group. You will not see a management port group, because in ESX server, you manage the ESX server using the service console, not using the VM kernel. Did you create that second port group in the second switch? Yes, I created just a few minutes back. The second port group I created 2 minutes back. I can create another port group right on that switch. Add. This will be my third switch. So now I created another port group on this switch. Now I have 3 port groups on this. So you can create multiple port groups like that. How many ever you want. Or you can create different switches, and create. So it's your choice. We will talk about it. There are some best practices and all, but right now I don't think you need to get into that level of detail. We will talk about those things, how you create, what are the best practices and all. We will look into it later. But just for your current understanding, understand that you can create multiple switches. Each switch can have multiple port groups. It can have different type of port groups together or the same type of port groups. Everything is possible. Any combination is possible. Here is a switch that has 3 port groups. Virtual machine port group, VM kernel port group, and a service console port group. The VMs are connected to virtual machine port group. In this case, let me ask you a question. If you look at this picture carefully, can SQL Server talk to Apache Server? No. Okay. Can I talk to Apache Server or SQL Server from my desktop? If they are up and running, can I talk to these 2 servers from my desktop? Yes. Okay. Through the service console. Okay. That was a intelligent answer, but through a service console, you never can talk to a VM. You can start and power off and power on, but let's say I want to copy a file or I want to access a website running on that Apache server. I cannot, because my desktop is sitting here, right outside of this. I have to connect through here, and I come here and stand here. Can I talk to this switch? If I cannot talk to this switch, how can I talk to this? Are you getting what I'm trying to tell you here? But these 2 VMs can talk to each other because they are connected to a switch. It is like a hub. If you are familiar with the old term, a hub is something just like, it's actually a layer 2 traffic. You don't need anything. It's a layer 2 traffic. You can just connect and communicate to computers as long as they are connected to a hub or a switch. But if I want to talk to this through this here, I should have an uplink here, right? Am I correct or not? Are you getting what I'm trying to tell you here? Because there is no connection here. That's a problem. So let us move on to the next picture. Now you have uplinks. You have this virtual switch connected to all these things. So just imagine this picture. It is something very similar to I was showing you earlier. You have a virtual switch, and that switch has 4 network cards. Earlier I showed you 2 network cards, but now in this picture there are 4 uplinks to this virtual switch. Now I can talk. Correct? So this is how the concept is. Certain things you need to understand very clearly. A VM kernel port group can only be used for VM kernel communication. In an ESXi server, this VM kernel port group can be used for the management also. But in an ESX server, there is a separate port group called service console port group, and that is what is used for the management. But if you have a ESXi server, then basically this whole thing is not there. It is not at all there in this. So imagine a picture without that. That is what we are learning. But if it is an ESX server, this has to be there. This port group has to be there. Okay? That globe symbol, this globe symbol is not an uplink symbol. This is the uplink symbol. This is that green dot to green dot means an uplink. That means you have a connection to the thing. The globe is actually a connection for your port group to the switch. So you can see two globes here, or two ports. That is actually, this is how you connect. See, everything you connect need a port on your switch. So even though if I take this switch, if I am drawing this switch here, this in a paper, this is how my switch will look like. This is that virtual switch. I have one connection going to my physical NIC, VM NIC 0. I have, that's a problem, I cannot do that. I have one connection for my physical NIC. I have one connection for this one. I have that port group connected here, and inside the port group I have so many VMs. I have 2 VMs. Those 2 VMs are also connected to here. Because this port group is managed by the kernel needs to talk to the port group all the time. So it needs a connection. So you can see the green buttons here, 1, 2, 3. This, don't connect this one. Look at the switch, 1, 2, 3 ports are open now. Or there are 3 ports that are currently being used here. Why are you not seeing these 2 is because they are not on. I'm going to open student 3 now. If I power on student 3, you can see that that will become a green dot, because that will, see, now student 3 become a green port. Now it is started using a port. So every switch by default has 120 ports. Just imagine a switch with 120 ports. You cannot buy a switch with 120 ports from Cisco or Brocade. Maximum is 64 ports. A virtual switch can be configured up to 4088 ports if you really want to. Imagine a switch with 4088 ports. You may love to have it something like that from Cisco, so that you can attach all your workstations, everything to that switch. But that's not possible. This is a virtual switch. It is possible. The minimum amount of port is 8. By default, in an ESXi server, it will be 120 ports. But you can configure a switch with a limited number of ports. Those things are there. I'm not going to talk about those things now. We will come back to the properties of the switch and all later. I'm now trying to understand only the general concept about a switch. We have to look at the properties and all later. But a virtual switch is a very powerful switch. If you really look into a switch properties of a VMware switch is actually 10 times powerful than a powerful Cisco switch. It can do a lot more than a powerful Cisco switch. But again, one important thing I forgot to ask you. A virtual switch is a switch that operates in layer 3. It's a layer 3 technology. When I say layer 3, we are talking about the transport layer. We are not talking about the data link layer. So trunking, access port, VLANs, all those things are layer 2 technology. Physical, the data link layer, the MAC addresses and all. That is layer 2. This is layer 3. So a virtual switch is a layer 3 switch. Okay? A layer 3 switch equivalent to a Cisco switch, a virtual switch is 10 times better than that. Okay? Okay, that was a good question from Gene. I will answer that question. When you have an uplink through the NIC card, what do you use to communicate to the VM, the service console? No, this net link is actually now here in this particular case. Let us not focus about that now. Let us focus about this switch now. If this VM wants to talk to me or to my desktop, let me take a picture. I think that will be better to explain that. Okay, these are all questions that are going to come. That's fine. Keep asking your questions. Okay, let us put a virtual switch here. I'm drawing only a virtual switch here. Just imagine that there is actually this virtual switch is inside your ESX server. So you have a VMs here. Okay, so this is a virtual switch. Let us create some port groups here. I'm creating a port group here, one port group here, another port group here, two port groups here. Let me give it a color. So I have two port groups here. These both are virtual machine port groups. This virtual switch is actually connected to a physical network card here. So we will have a uplink connection from here to here, correct? There is a VM here. This VM is connected to this port group. So let us give this VM also a green color so that it is green port group. I have another VM here. This VM is now part of the pink port group. So I'm going to connect this one to this port group. Now they are part of two different port groups, but they are part of one single switch. But they are part of two different port groups. There is only one uplink here. And you know that this uplink is connected to a physical Cisco switch or a Brocade switch here. This is a physical switch. And my laptop or my desktop is also connected to this switch. There is another switch inside this server. I'm going to draw another switch here, like let me put it in a blue color. There is another switch here. In that switch, I have a port group, which is actually my VM kernel port group. That switch is also connected to this another port, another switch port. So there is a NIC card here also. So now this is VM NIC 0 and this is VM NIC 1. Let me explain this picture. I know it's a little complicated here. I have two switches here. Let us call this as vSwitch 0 and this is vSwitch 1. vSwitch 0 only has one port group, which is actually a VM kernel port group, which is configured with an IP address 10.200 or 202. Okay, that is our server's IP address, right? This 202. I want to manage this whole ESX server. I am connecting from here. What IP address I should use here? In my vSphere client, what IP address I should type here if I want to manage this ESX server?
10.10.10.202.
Correct. So when I want to do 10.10.10.202, my connection will go like this, come to this switch, come through here, and I access the service console, and now I can manage the server. If I want to talk to these two VMs, any one of these two VMs, Raiden is asking, is it going through service console? No. My connection will go how? I don't have any communication with this service console here. I am going to talk to a server. It is my company's web server. I don't know whether it is on ESX server 202 or whether it is on A server or B server. That's none of my business. I know that my server has an IP address. The IP address is 10.10.7. I will open my browser and I will type http:/10.10.7. Then my traffic will go like this. It will go through this port group. It will come through here and I will access this VM. You getting? No communication in that case. But understand that problem? I'm using a separate network card here. But in this particular case, I have my management network and I have my VMs both on the same switch and I am using only one network card. Let us put that in our picture scenario. Let us say I have a virtual machine port group in this server also, which is actually, let me put it in blue color. And I have a VM also which is attached to it, which is blue color. Now, if I want to talk to this VM, this blue VM, my connection will go through this switch at top. If I want to talk to service console, still I use the same path, but I will be talking to service console. You getting what I'm saying? So you can have different combination. You have to understand that. Okay. So these are general setup. This is not the right way to do it. I will explain the best practices later. But right now you understand the concept, understand the flow, and understand what a switch is, what the connections are. So keep asking questions. If you don't understand, please ask. Okay. That's the thing. Now there is one more thing. Gene asked a question. How do this VM talk to this VM? Or let us don't do that now. Let us say, how do this VM can talk to this VM? Can anybody tell me? How do the green VM can talk to the light blue VM? Sorry, not this, check mark this one, light blue VM. How can these two VMs communicate? Can anybody tell me from your way of imagination? Come on, guys. Think about it. How can that two VMs communicate? If I give you the control, how do you draw that picture? How do the VMs communicate? That's what I wanted to know. No answers? At least try, man. Try. Can you hear me?
Can you migrate one of the virtual machines from switch 1 to switch 0?
Okay. That's a good thought process. Yeah. Any other thoughts? You don't have to actually. The thing is, this is how that VM communicates. This VM will communicate through here, through this switch. It comes through here. It comes through this physical switch. Come through here. It comes through here. That is the only way it can talk. So Gene was asking that question earlier. How do this VM, which is student workstation 3, can talk to student workstation 1? If that needs to happen, let me explain you how the connection will go. This will go like this. It will go like this. It will go to the external physical switch. It will come here. It will come through here and it will talk. That is the only way it can happen. But if one wants to talk to two and they both belongs to the same port group, nothing is needed. It can talk just like that because they are in the same switch. The connection will go like this. Or if I wants to talk, it will talk through here. It will talk through here. It will talk. No connection will go through here. Nothing needed. But if this guy wants to talk, if vSender 5 wants to talk to student 2, that connection should come like this. I'll tell you some more thing. So you may be wondering why the heck VMware is not allowed a communication like, let me show you here. You may be asking why VMware didn't allow this switch to this switch, like daisy chaining two switches. If this was there, because this is a switch inside a VM kernel, this switch is also inside a VM kernel. Why not VMware didn't allow that, right? You may be wondering. Let us look at that picture here. I'm going to the next picture here. See, there are three different switches. Can this switch talk to this switch? And this switch talk to this switch? That is called as daisy chaining. You can connect one switch to another switch, then another switch to another switch, right? You know, if you are familiar, you can know that. I have 4 or 5 switches in my basement, all Cisco switches connected one by one by one. I only have one internet connection coming to the main switch. Then the another one is connected here. Now all my computers connect. That is called daisy chaining. Daisy chaining has a lot of bad characters. It can create loops inside your servers, and it can create a lot of problems. You know, spanning tree and all other issues. These are all advanced networking issues. So there are spanning tree protocols and things like that. But it can create loops when you have these kind of things. So VMware explicitly denied that connection. There is no community, even though they are inside the VM kernel. There is absolute no communication between this switch and this switch. If something on this switch wants to talk to this switch, the communication has to go to the outside world, come inside and talk. That is the only way you can do that. So that is why if you have a VM on this switch, and if that VM wants to talk to this VM, the connection has to go like this, go to the physical switch, come here and talk. Whereas, if you have two VMs that are inside one port group, they can talk to each other. Now you may be thinking, okay, that's the case, then it's fine. So this student 4 and student 1 and 2 are on the same switch. Can they talk? Isn't it? That's your next question. I'm saying that is not possible because these are two different port groups and they are within the same switch, but still since they belong to two different port groups, that will really come when we learn about VLAN. I will talk about it. For now, I will just put you, since these VMs belongs to two different port groups, even though they are part of the same switch, if this VM wants to talk to this VM, the communication has to go like this, to the switch, and then it has to come back and talk. You getting what I'm saying? So there is a lot of things you need to understand in this thing. So this is how the packets come and back and forth. So that's how these are all isolations in order to protect VMs and many hacking and other things. You will learn that things in detail when we get into the properties. I'm just going little more detail since the flow is like that. You're asking questions, you're throwing out questions, and I need to answer that. That's why. So I hope you guys all understand what a switch is. So here is the thing. You can create different switches with different port groups. We talked. Now you see here, there are two physical switches here. And they in this particular case, if you look at it, you can see that they isolated the service console traffic completely. This is a good practice. It's always a good practice to isolate your management traffic from your virtual machine traffic. Here in this case, tell me, are there any VMs going to use this network card?
No.
Who can use this network card at this point? Who can use this?
It cannot be used by the service console.
Only the service console. So I know that a faulty VM, let us say, this has been given to a Infosys developer who is watching, 2020 World Cup. He's streaming. He's taking all the bandwidth of my bandwidth. But I immediately want to do something. But he is choking my bandwidth. So you should never, ever share your management traffic with your virtual machine traffic. If possible, isolate it. Give it a separate switch, give it a separate uplink, and keep it separate. This is the way you have to do it. If you have only one network card, yeah, there is no choice. You have to do that. So these are some best practices we'll talk. But in this case, now you see these two VMs, they have putting it through these two network cards. Isolated. Again, these two VMs can only use these two network cards. Maybe you can add future another 10 more VMs, but add them to this switch. And you see the VM kernel port group isolated. Nobody. So VM kernel is another important thing. It needs to talk to these switches. It needs to talk to many other servers, things like that. But you don't want a VM, a faulty VM or a developer screwing up your network wherein you are affected with the traffic. So you have options. You have to design your network based on that. So don't worry about that now. When we get into the properties, we will see different options. But there are many options in a switch. You can do the thing by creating different port groups, by creating different switches. So thumb rule is you can have as many switches as you want. You can have as many port groups as you want on a single switch. You can have a combination of port groups on a single switch. These are all possible things. I talked a lot of things now. Guys, please try to read that networking book, not this one. In that vSphere 4.1 course material, there is a networking chapter. Try to read that first chapter, or go to Scott Lowe's book and try to read about the first chapter that talks about networking. You will see all these properties. Now that you got a picture and now you read it, you will understand it much better. Okay, these things, don't give any values to these values, please. Okay, 8 to 1060 to 32 physical NICs up to 512 port group. This was 2007. VMware hypervisor has changed a lot after that. You can have up to I think up to 1024 port groups today. This is an old thing, but the concept is same. The numbers and all are improved. That's all. Okay. So don't think that these are the maximum numbers. So if you want to know the right numbers, read the Scott Lowe's 5.0 book. You will get the details. Okay. So that is what is networking in general, guys. So now you know how to move a VM. If I am asking you, move the vCenter 5 to VM Network 2, what you will do?
You open the properties of vCenter 5 and change its port group.
Perfect. Now let me do one more thing here. I think I know its time is little past, but guys, it's interesting. I know you are all getting that interest. That flow, I should finish it. So let me do one thing. It's not late. So I'm going to create one more switch here, a virtual machine port group, a switch with a. I told you cannot create a switch without a port group. It could be either a VM kernel or anything. So you can come here. No uplinks. I'm going to create this as a name with isolated. Next. So now I created, it's much more bigger now, guys. Now I'm going to ask certain questions here. I need answers, okay? I'm going to move students workstation 1, 2. Now how many port groups I will see here? See, I can see all the different port groups here. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 port groups. I am moving that VM to isolated. Now you can see that it will come here. Okay. You see that? I have 5 port groups here. Do I really have 5 port groups? Can anybody has any doubt? Let me ask you something. I'm saying I have 5 port groups. If so, what are those 5 virtual machine port groups? I'm having 5 virtual machine port groups here in this server. What are those 5 port groups? Fanny, I'm giving you a chance to answer that. If you can answer that properly, I will take it. And when you say a port group, tell me what switch it is and things like that. Try to explain it in a good technical terms. Let's see. Okay. Fanny, you're thinking, or I will give a chance to Becker. All right, Becker, go ahead.
You have 2 port groups for switch 0. You have
Okay, listen, go with me. Okay, you said you have 2 port groups on switch 0. Which is correct? What type of port groups are there?
You have a virtual machine port group, and you have a VM kernel port.
Okay. I am asking only about virtual machine port groups here. So you understand on vSwitch 0, there is only 1 virtual machine port, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now let's move on to the next one.
As far as switch 1 is concerned, you have 3 virtual machine port groups.
Okay. What are their names?
VM Network 2, VM Network 3, and VM Network 4.
Okay, good, perfect. And what uplink are they using?
VM NIC 1.
Okay, perfect. Move on.
Switch 2 is 1 machine port group, and it's labeled as isolated, and it has no uplink.
Perfect. So you understand that, then you understand whatever I taught so far. Now my question is, again, to you itself, Becker. Can student workstation 1 talk to any of the other VMs? Or is there any possibility that we can make it talk to other VM?
There's a possibility, not currently with it being on switch 2.
Okay, currently you said it's not. Why is it not possible? Why can't it talk to another VMs?
Because there's no uplink.
Okay, there is no uplink, so it cannot talk to any other VMs at this point, correct?
Yes.
So if I want the student workstation 1 to talk to vCenter 5 VM, what should I do? What are my options? Give me a couple of options. There are a couple of options you can do.
You could always migrate workstation 1 to vSwitch 0.
Okay, it's not migrate. You can use probably migrate. I think migrate is not the option. Move or change the VM's port group from isolated to which port group?
Oh, sorry.
Any other port group, correct. It can be put here also. It can go through the network. You can move it to another port group, correct. That's a good point. What is other option?
You could take one of the VM NICs and move that to VM switch 2.
I didn't get you that answer. What is that?
You could change one of the VM NICs and put it on a vSwitch 2.
Correct, which to correct. That's a good point. Good. One more option. Yes, actually there is one more option. Is there?
Add another NIC card.
Yeah, I mean there is no NIC card. So other option is this. I can come to 5 and change 5 to isolated. Now can it talk?
Yes.
In this case it is possible because they both are in the same port group. If it was on a separate port group on the isolated switch, it's not going to work. But it is, since they both belongs to the same port group with the same switch, even though the switch do not have an uplink, there is no problem. They can still talk. So this is where we do our domain controller changes. When we have Active Directory wide testings or something we need to do, we create isolated switches and test it in that is like an isolated bubble. It's a world, different world. There, those VMs can only talk to each other. They cannot talk to outside world. So I can create another domain controller or another same server like my app server there, and I can do my troubleshooting. So this switch is actually of very use when you really troubleshoot problems. So it is highly recommended to create an isolated switch in every ESX server, so that whenever you want to troubleshoot a VM or something, you can put that VM into that isolated switch, give it the same IP address or whatever, it doesn't matter, and you can test it. But it will not talk to the outside world. So your outside world will never know what's going on, but you are in an isolated world and you can test it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So Becker, you understand. So let me ask others, guys, did you understand what we are talking here? If anybody has any doubt. Okay.
Yes.
I'm 100% sure that Becker understands this properly, because the way he talks, the way he explained means that he got that, whatever that, the trick. That is the clear thing. If you don't understand that, it will be difficult. So guys, if you have any doubt, use your emails. Business time, I will be very busy. I may not be able to respond. Sometimes I may be, but many times I may not be able to respond if you have questions or emails. I will be back-to-back meeting. But please communicate yourself or call. You all have their phone numbers. I believe I gave everybody's phone number, right? You all have that email. Oh, I don't have that here actually. Actually, please communicate, and talk to each other and, discuss. That's a good way. At least somebody will respond. Okay, so if you have questions and then you have a doubt, come back to me. I can explain. I think, guys, believe me, I spend so much time to explain because I know I teach with that passion. I want to make sure that you all understand. If I'm just taking money and going, I could have finished this in 5 minutes. Just, this is how you create. But I'm giving you different options. I don't think anybody teach like this. please, so cooperate with me, read it, and I want to make sure that you all understand this thing. And you all know that I get many students from my other students' recommendation. Even Raiden and Becker are coming through another recommendation. Gene came through another student of mine who is currently working in Verizon. So please, so this is all because they all probably like my class. I think you are also liking it. This is the way I teach, but I need you guys to cooperate with me. And I don't have a problem sitting and talking for another 1 more hour. Absolutely not a problem. There is 45-hour cut. Yeah, I mean, there is a point I have to stop the class, but if I'm teaching something, I want to make sure that you understand it rather than just finishing. So cooperate with me. I think you all can do it. It is very simple and it is very interesting. You need to understand the inside details of how these technologies work. Otherwise, otherwise I don't think it makes any sense. So that's a key point. So this is what it is. And now one more thing, and I want to finish it. Sridhar, are you still listening to me? Can you hear and can you see what I'm doing here? Can you type, please? Sridhar, are you listening to me? Can you hear me or anything? Okay, thanks. I want to do a small step so that you guys can do a lot of practice. Now you know how to install an ESXi server. You know how to create switches. You know how to create different port groups. You can create VM kernel port group and things. Anytime you create an IP address, whether it is a management port group or whether it is a simple VM kernel port group, you have to give an IP address. Ping and make sure that the IP you are using is not using. Ping and make sure, please don't just on the fly give an IP address. You always make sure, ping it and see nobody is using. Even though you said, okay, I'm going to use, I see some mails using INO 16, IP 96. That's okay. But before you configure your server, make sure from your workstation, that means that 68 dot whatever server you are connecting, do a ping and see whether that IP is responding or not. If it is responding, don't do it, because I have many other servers, even some public facing web servers running here. So please make sure you use that. What is the best practice in real-time environment? For what? Arvind. Best practice in companies have a, in my company we have a product called SolarWinds. It is an IP address management tool. That's a separate product from a company called SolarWinds. We use that to manage. So if anybody takes an IP address, there is some process, the standard process. If Deepu is building a server, Deepu has to first, before building the server, he should understand. So when you're building a server, you cannot just go and build a server. You should know what the name of the server is. You should have an idea what IP address you are going to give. You should have an idea how much memory, how much, everything you should know ahead of time, right? It's not that you're doing in a lab. Before designing, you have a design document, you keep it, you fill in all the columns, IP address, vMotion IP, management IP, how many port groups, what is the memory configuration, and then go and reserve an IP address in SolarWinds. Some companies manage IP addresses in an Excel file. We used to do that for a long time. Only 3 or 4 years back, we moved everything to a software-based IP management. Most companies still have a, Excel file. So your server team will have an IP address sheet. Go to that sheet, pick the next IP address. That is all you will learn when you go to a company. That company will tell you what are their way of managing it. There is no standard way. Every company do it in a different way. Okay. So what I wanted to talk to you here is this. So now you know how to build an ESX server. You know how to create a virtual machine. You don't know the properties of that. But I wanted to show you is this. I'm going to create a new virtual machine here. So you go to the custom option always. Click next. Give it a name. Let us call it as Win2K3 underscore 01 underscore Deepu underscore 01. I would recommend you to name all your VMs something like this. Always put your name, and underscore 01, 02 like that. So I know that VM was created by Deepu. This VM was created by Raiden. Not now. These are all okay for now because you're going to delete and rebuild that server. You know, Aravind build a server, tomorrow Raiden will rebuild that. But once we get on to the clustering and all, it is very important to know who built that server and all because we do different migrations. So I'm going to create a VM, so make it a practice like this. So I'm going to build a Windows 2003 server here. That is why I put it Win2K3. Next. Now, where is that VM going to be stored? It's going to be stored on the local storage of that because this ESX server only has one data store. You know what a data store is now. What is the capacity of the data store? 405 GB. How much free space is there? That is what you importantly look, 192 GB. So you can create a VM with multiple hard drives if you want, but the maximum you can go is 190 because that's the only free space. And I don't want you to do that. You should always limit that space to the limit so that multiple VMs can be created. If you create a VM with 190 GB hard disk, you cannot create another VM. So think about that. There are two versions of VM are available. These are two different versions. Don't worry about that. Use the version 8. Here you come. Here is, don't think that you are selecting something means you are going to install all. You can select Windows 2008 R2 and you can install 2003. But that is not the thing. There are certain things, I will explain it later. If you are going to build a Windows 2003, you go here and select the Windows 2003 server. This doesn't guarantee that you're going to be installing. You can still install a Ubuntu on this even though you select this. But you know, it's a best practice to select the version you are planning to install so that in later when you do queries and you write scripts and all to find out, okay, how many Windows 2003 servers are in my environment? That script is actually going to look at this. But if you select this and if you install Windows 2008 inside that VM as a guest, you are scripting, the values you are getting from the script is of no meaning. So always make it a practice. You select the right operating system as the selection. Next. These are the number of CPUs and all. You can keep the default. You don't need to worry about it. The memory size 1 GB. I will give around probably 4 GB memory for this VM because it will be much faster. Now comes the section of network. Where do you want to put this VM? In which port group? I'm creating it on this server. How many port groups I have? I click here. I will see all the port groups. You want to put it on the first port group, you want to put it on the second port group, you want to put it on third, everything you can do. You want to build it in isolated, you can do that also. I'm going to put it on my VM network, the default port group. These are something called as different network, virtual network drivers, VMware's drivers. You can leave this for now. But the latest and the most powerful virtual NIC driver is VMX NIC 3. This is a very powerful network card driver. This driver has a lot more features. Probably we'll talk about this later. But at this point, you just leave this E1000 when you're building. How many network cards you want? If you have 2 network cards and you want to put one on that network and this network, now it can act as a router and all. So don't do that. I don't think it is needed. But if you want, you can do that way also. If you want to make your VM to act as a router, then you can do that. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that routing technology and all. In a normal scenario, you never have to use that. Typically, one network card is more than enough. Click next. This is the SCSI controller. It's just nothing but your disk controller. You know, our ASX servers, we have the smart array controller. Like that, your VM should have a controller to manage your virtual disks of your VM. Your VM going to have virtual disk and you're going to manage it using this thing. Select the default. These are different drivers, but by default you select whatever it comes. That's the best way to do it always. Now I'm going to create a hard disk to my VM. Create a new virtual disk. And it's 8 GB by default. You see that 8 GB. If I would have selected Windows 2008 as my base thing, I would have seen this 40. That is something like a template. So 8 GB is more than enough to build a Windows 2003. I'm going to give 10 GB. Dual homed is not better. It is not dual home means in a VMs you cannot team it, and there is no need to team two virtual NICs, because virtual NIC and virtual switches, they are all software. There is no question, absolutely no question about a failure. You are teaming HP's NIC cards using HP NIC teaming software because they are physical network cards, and there is a good possibility that the physical network cards can fail. That is where you are teaming. In a software world, in a VMware world, you have a virtual NIC, you have a virtual switch. There is absolutely no question about a failure. So there is no need to team, no need to basically put two network cards until otherwise you want to do routing. Then you need two network cards. Otherwise, one network card is more than enough for a VM. And today's world, you can have different type of speed and all. So I hope you understand, right, Fanny? Okay. There are different disk provisioning techniques. I will strongly recommend you to select this thin provisioning button. When you do, you don't know what that is. I know. We will talk about it when we get on to storage. But anytime you build a disk, always select that thin provisioning for now. And also make sure that store with the virtual machine. What that means is this disk, which is a VMDK file, going to be stored along with the VM. So I'm going to select that, click next. This is the SCSI driver, finish, and finish. So I created a new VM. Now you can see that VM has come to the switch. See here, it came here. I can always change. If I want to increase the memory or anything, you can always go and edit the properties. You can add. Somebody was asking me earlier, Deepu, how do I add another hard disk to my VM? Sure, you can do that. Click on the add button. Select hard disk. Click next. Create a new hard disk. That will be your second hard disk. 8 GB, thin provisioning. Next, next, finish. Now your computer has two hard drives. One is this, and I would say OK. Go back to the properties now. You can see that there are two hard drives to your server. And if you look at the properties here, you can see that hard disk, this hard disk is actually in the data store. Look here carefully. This is in the data store local storage 74. There is a folder called win2k3_deepu01. Inside that folder, there is a file called win2k3_01_deepu-01.vmdk. That is that disk file. That is a software actually. It's a software file. It is nothing but a file. That is what we are learning on. It is a file that is sitting inside the storage. If you go to the second drive, you can see that it is in the same folder, but it is actually 01_01. You see that it is the second drive. So that's the thing. Let me show you that from a storage perspective. If you go and open and browse this data store, you can see that Deepu Win2K3 here. And you can see that there are two VMDK files. See, this is the first drive you created, the 10 GB, and this is the second drive you created, the 8 GB. Okay? So you created the VM, you have done everything. Now you're going to install Windows 2003. How do you install Windows 2003? So open the console. The server is still down. Power on the VM. You have to do that. There are other ways to do it, but I'm showing you in a different way now. So always power it on first. It is not going to find there is no operating system. Now I want to install Windows 2003 in this. So click on the CD. Go to my ISO disk. This will take you to your 2003 folder. Okay, that's not the thing. I think I have a Windows 2003. I have a Windows 2003 SP1 standard. This is my server. Okay, in your server, you will see a folder. You select the ISO file for your Windows 2003 operating system. Open. Make sure that it is connected. You see that it is connected. Now you want to reboot this server. Then only it is going to load from that CD. Now you inserted the CD, Windows 2003 CD, to boot the installation. How do you reboot the server? You can reboot a server by pressing Control, Alt, and the Insert button. Don't do Control, Alt, Delete. If you do Control, Alt, Delete, what happens? Your computer gets locked. You do Control, Alt, and the Insert button, it will reboot your computer. Now it is going to boot from that. See, setup is inspecting your computer. It is booting from that operating system and you started the installation. Okay? So that is how it is. Sujan is saying you don't need to reboot. I don't know what you mean by that, Sujan. You have to reboot that server to boot from that. I don't know if you press enter it will boot. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it will automatically. Yeah, it will automatically boot from the virtual disk. You know, but, when you enter the things, because I tried yesterday, it works. Yeah, and
Okay.
only thing is that the system is started and it goes to like the sleep mode. I mean the 2003 server, and what happened is it's really hard to log into, like pressing the control or delete to log in again.
There is something called VMware Tools. I think I did mention to you a little while ago. VMware Tools is something that you install inside your guest OS to improve the performance of your VM. So I didn't talk about that. Yes, when you install an operating system, a guest operating system, it will be a little difficult for you to manage from your remote site. But at least try to install and learn. But once we install the VMware Tools, it will become much more easier to manage, because that has some drivers for mouse drivers, some display drivers, and some advanced networking drivers, and all is part of the VMware Tools, which you will get only when you install VMware Tools. In order to install VMware Tools, first you have to have the operating system or the guest OS. So first thing is install the guest OS, then install the VMware Tools. I will talk about VMware Tools later, but I'm just trying to show you, you guys can install operating system. Now you follow the steps and you install it. So if you go to your VM, which is that your workstation, which I give you 68 dot whatever that colon 7733. In that server, in the D drive software folder, there is a Windows 2003 folder where you can see the Windows 2003 ISO file, and there is also a temporary license file also there. If you want, you have to use that, because Windows 2003 requires a license. If you want to install Windows 2008 or Ubuntu or Fedora, everything is there and they all don't require license, you can install. If you want to quickly see something, go for a Fedora or a Ubuntu. It is much more easier than installing a Windows machine. So it's up to your choice you want to install. You got it, right? So I'm going to stop this here, and I want to show you something here now. So I'm going to stop this here, power off this VM for now. Okay, now I want to show you some important thing. This is something mistakes, open the console. The VM is not powered on now, isn't it? Is this VM on? This VM is not on. You can go to the CD, you can go to here, but you can see that you don't have that option to connect to the local drive. You get that option to connect to an ISO file only if the VM is on. Okay, there are other options there. Connect to an ISO image on a data store. If you have the ISO file of the Windows 2003 on this data store, you could have done that. But right now we have not learned that step, so don't worry about it. There are different ways you can do it. But if you want to do it at now, or you think that okay, before starting, so that when I start it will boot from my CD, but you cannot put a CD like this. So that's why you have to power on first. Then you get the option to connect to your local hard drive. See here now you go, you get this image, and now you attach your Windows ready. But now, like he said, I'm going to enter it. I did enter, but it's not booting. I'm entering now, like Sujan said. I don't know it's booting. I don't know how you got it work, but it is not booting. No, I have to restart. But if you can wait. You can wait for a few minutes. It will reboot, because there is a timeout for this client MAC address checking. It will reboot again. If you press escape, nothing is going to happen. See, it is going to proceed actually. It's actually escape. Now it will reboot. So you have to wait for all that process. I think if you can do more escape, I don't think anything is happening. It is stuck there. So that is it. Now I rebooted. It is picking up. So you can reboot or you can do escape, whatever it is. You need the system to reboot and try to access that. That's how it is. Okay. So try to do this, guys. Build these VMs. Build a couple of VMs on your servers. So not just installing ESX server, and now you know the networks, you know where to put a VM, you know how to move VMs. You want to create 2 VMs, give the VM some IP address. If you leave it, it will get DHCP. That's fine too. Find out the DHCP IP address of your VM. See, you can communicate. If you really want to explore, you can do a lot of things. But I don't think, I have never seen anybody doing that much. But those who have time, you can create VMs. You can create multiple switches. All the switches in my environments are connected to my real physical switch, so they can all communicate each other. It's a full-fledged lab. You can do whatever you want. You can build 2 ESX servers, put one VM on one server and another VM on one server, configure both the VMs with proper IP addresses, and see whether those 2 VMs can communicate. You can do that. But I'm not going to teach you how Windows servers and how to configure VM. That's not part of my scope, but you have to figure out what it is. If you know how to install Windows servers, if you know how to install Ubuntu, it is your thing. You can do that. Okay? So guys, I think we will stop here now. I think thanks for staying a little late, but I think you all understand what I taught today. So if you have questions, please come back and ask, but try to make use of your servers. 4 servers, 16, 17, 18, and 19 are available for you to work. There is no class tomorrow. I hope all of you got my invite for the next week. Again, let me tell you very clearly here, please plan, because people have other plans. There is class on 25th, 26th, 28th, and 30th. I have already sent invite for that 4 classes. And in October, there is definitely classes on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. 3 days continuously I'm going to take class on this thing. And there may not be class 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. But you can practice these days. The labs are open. I'm going out, but I will be still having control to the lab through my iPad or something. But you guys can work on this, do whatever I taught in this section here. So I tried to finish storage, and probably we will get into some vCenter also. By this time we will have, because I have so many days classes. So we're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh yeah, definitely. We will be almost coming to around 75% by this time, and then once I come back, we'll be able to finish. So you will be able to use the labs, and again, you can use the lab even after my class is over for probably 1 or 2 days until I start my new batch. Again, not up to the thing, but probably I will normally give the lab 4 or 5 days after my class. So the servers will be up and running. You guys can utilize that. LUN is logical unit number. LUN is actually a name you are given. So right now we will learn LUN in detail when we get into storage. So when I say LUN means I'm meaning one data store or one storage. It's not a data store. A storage is called as a LUN. A single unit of a chunk of storage is called as LUN. When you have a computer with local hard drives, or a server with local hard drives, what we have, we don't call it as LUN. We normally call it as logical disk or local disk. But when you have disks or storage provided from external storage, we call it as a LUN. It is actually LUN stands for logical unit number. It is nothing but a portion of a storage derived from a larger storage. So in a SAN storage, you're going to have terabytes and terabytes of storage. And when you ask your SAN guy, he will carve out a small portion of the disk using different technology. Again, it's the same SAN technology. He will give a small chunk to your ESX server that you can call it as a LUN. A LUN is actually created by using the RAID. There are RAID groups. Then there are LUNs. Basically there are meta LUNs, and then you create meta LUNs to create a LUN. It's all for fault tolerance and high availability and better performance. This is not a storage class, and I think we have some storage guys here. I believe Samrat, I think he can probably add more to that. I'm not going to talk about that in the class, but maximum size of a LUN in an ESX server, good question. I will talk about it when we come. It was 2 terabytes all these days, but now it is 64 terabytes. with the new technology with ESX i5, it is no more. Using the new technology called a quit partition table GPT. So it's a different partition table. You can do that. There is also extents and things. Right now, it is maximum size of the LAN is 2 terabytes, and then you can create extents, 32 extents to a maximum of 64 terabytes. Communication between VM kernel, service console, and VM on 2 different vSwitches via external. That's correct. Yes.
That was answer to when you asked that question.
What is that?
No, I have typed it when you were asking the question, how the 2 different VMs sitting on 2 different switches, how do they communicate?
Yeah, I told you, right? It has to go through the physical switch.
Yeah, at the time I typed the answer.
Okay. All right, guys. So thanks and good night, and we will see you. I will see you guys on Tuesday evening, 8:30 p.m. Correct? Good night.